Okay. Right. Good evening, everyone. To those watching publicly, apologies for the delay. We've had a few technical issues with the streaming system this evening. In regards to just a quick few housekeeping calls for members of the meeting, could I ask members to please do switch off all mobile phones and turn them to silent, along with any Alexas or other apps. This meeting is being recorded and broadcast. So please do keep your indoor voices and be as polite and courteous as you would be in polite conversation. In addition, if you are not talking, could you please have your camera off if you have the ability to do so, in order to save on bandwidth and to focus on the principal talkers on a specific item. And in addition to that, we're covering quite a bit. We're covering a few things this evening. Including the flood risk management update, arts and culture strategy, and an update on the elections in May. So attending this evening, we have Councillor, myself in the chair, Councillor Guy Granderson, Councillor Abdul Loynes, Councillor Alison Swaddle, Officer Anne Hunter, Officer Cullen Wareham, Councillor Charlotte Haytham-Taylor, Councillor Clive Jones. I can't remember if you're an officer or not, Francesca Hobson, Councillor Gary Cowan, Councillor Graham Howe, Grant Thornton, Councillor Parry Bath, Councillor Paul Fishwick. I'm so sorry, I forgot how to pronounce your name.
Fiala?
Fiala, thank you. I wanted to say Fiana, and I knew that wasn't right. Fiala, Robin Cotts, and Councillor Shirley Boyd. Callum, have we had any apologies for absences?
Yes, Chairman. Apologies submitted from Councillor Emma Hobbs.
Okay. Okay. Any declarations of interest?
Yes, Guy. With regard to the Arts and Culture Alliance, as someone who is a member of the Alliance, I don't think it would be appropriate for me to be actually trying to scrutinise my colleagues on the Alliance. So I'll just stay quiet during that. I'm not sure if that's a declaration of interest, but I think now is the time to mention.
I think that would be classified. Is that under pecuniary, Callum, off the top of my head?
Yeah, I would recommend, Shirley, that as you say, as you're involved on the working group, that it's probably more appropriate as you sort of don't take part in this one.
Indeed, yeah, righto.
Okay, thank you. I'll make a note of that. Okay, public question time. Have we received any public questions, Callum?
No public questions, chat.
Okay, member public questions. I believe we've got one from Councillor Cowan.
We do, Chair, and I believe he's in the meeting.
Gary, do you want to speak now then?
Yes, yeah, I would. Thanks very much, Guy. The question is, the agenda states, and I quote, during the financial year 2020-2021, the flood and drainage team made further progress in fulfilling Woking Borough Council's statutory obligations as a lead local flood authority under the Flood and Water Management Act 2010. The primary responsibility as an LLFA is to manage the coordination of surface water and groundwater risk in order to protect residents from flooding, which I think is an admirable intention. My question is, does surface and groundwater risk include reservoirs and dams or not? Or is that a different water that residents do not need to protect themselves from?
Thank you for that, Gary. I've got an answer for you. I also have a bit of more information in addition to the answer, as this is something I've done research on in the past. Basically, the lead local flood authority is responsible for coordinating the response to surface water, groundwater, flood risk, and the Environment Agency is responsible for overseeing the management of reservoir flooding and for the management and implementation of reservoir safety regulations in England. They're also responsible for coordinating the management of fluvial, so river flooding. In regards to reservoirs and in specifically dams, etc. as well, that actually comes under a separate Act of Parliament, which is the Reservoir Act of, I believe it was 1975, in which that reservoirs, you're in Arborfield, so that means the principal reservoir that would be that you are probably asking about would be the ones in Bearwood Lakes, which are covered under that Act. And effectively, it is the responsibility of the landowner to basically conduct a 10-year structural risk assessment under the Reservoirs Act, and then coordinate with local authority members as to any planning that needs to be done in order to mitigate any risk. I think Bearwood's coming up in 2024, 2025. And the reason why I know this is that whilst I was on Early Town Council, we did research into the Maiden Early Reservoir Lake. So that report was done a few years back. Do you have a supplementary, Gary?
Yeah, well, you've studied the subject very well. Well done. Yeah, the problem I've got with it is, and I agree with pretty much everything you say, is that although the Environment Agency may have dam responsibility, we have a responsibility to our residents. And the council has granted planning permission to build 18 houses directly under the flood burst zone. And so there has to be a link between the council having responsibility in planning terms and the local flood risk as a local flood risk flood authority. And so the question is, although the council never informed the Environment Agency of this planning application, so there's a very grey area in if planning applications turn up. And so my question is, how does our planning and our flood risk fit in with this broad principle? I don't expect an answer now because it's fairly complex.
Indeed, Gary, and I think I might need to look to Francesca. Do you want to take a stab at this as well? Because I'm sitting here thinking I agree with Gary. This is a grey area, and probably what makes it even greyer is because I believe that land, the ownership of the lakes is transferred, isn't it? Reading Football Club now that owns it as well, so that adds an extra complication.
Yeah, I can answer certainly some of it. We can take it away and give you a more detailed response, Gary. So the planning application, the Environment Agency were consulted on, and we would expect them to comment in relation to, as Guy's already said, fluvial flooding, so river flooding and reservoir flooding. So they were consulted on the planning application, and if they had any concerns about reservoir flooding, they would have commented as such. But the Environment Agency, as Guy's already said, is responsible for reservoir safety regulations, and so they're responsible for making sure that the reservoir owners or operators are ensuring that they've done all of the works necessary to make sure that they're safe so that they won't breach and then cause flooding. So yeah, really, the main point is that it's really a responsibility of the Environment Agency. And in relation to that planning application, the Environment Agency were consulted.
Okay, thank you, Francesca. Gary, just quickly, as I just did something, have you actually gotten the last reports on that particular? I'm assuming this is the dam you're referring to in Bearwood. Done in 2015.
I've got some fairly comprehensive information on it, but one of the grey areas is that I can find no reference that Woking Borough Council ever consulted the Environment Agency. The agent for the developer, Peter Brett Associates, did, so that they were dealing with the Environment Agency, but there's no reference to the council ever doing it, and it never presented any of this evidence in the planning application to the council. So I think
we're gonna need to take this offline, Gary.
I accept.
Yeah, I'll work with Francesca and yourselves, and we'll get to the bottom of this, because this is a grey area, and it is something that will probably need to be raised a lot higher up than our level, because yeah, it's probably something that's a legacy from acts that haven't been properly reformed to the level that they normally are in the last 75, we're approaching 45 years ago.
Yeah, thanks, Guy. It's just clarification and clarity I'm looking for, and I really appreciate it. Thank you.
No problem. Thank you, Francesca. We'll pick that up as well later. Okay, going back to my notes. Okay, moving on. No more members' questions there, correct, Callum?
That's correct, Chairman.
Okay, so we'll move straight on to item 76, which is the flood risk management update.
Hi, Parry, did you want to say anything, or shall I press ahead with the presentation.
No, I'm quite happy for you to make the presentation, and then we'll be open to the questions, Francesca. That's fine.
Okay, no problem. I'll turn my camera on. Okay, so hello everyone. My name is Francesca Hobson. I am the service manager at Woking Borough Council for green infrastructure and blue infrastructure. So blue infrastructure element includes the drainage and flooding responsibilities that the council has under the Flood and Water Management Act. So we have this report that's come to Overview and Scrutiny Committee today, as we are required to report back to the Overview and Scrutiny Committee regularly on our progress that we've made in relation to our responsibilities under the Flood and Water Management Act. And I think the last time that we came to Overview and Scrutiny Committee was back in the late 2019, and we've had quite a few flooding events since then, so we thought that it was important to update you guys on what's happened and also the progress that's been made. So just to give a bit of background for those that aren't aware already, as under the Flood and Water Management Act, which came into effect in 2010, Woking Borough Council became a lead local flood authority, which meant that various different responsibilities were placed on us in order to reduce flood risk. So as we've just been talking about in relation to the earlier question, Woking Borough Council became responsible for coordinating the management and the response of surface water flood risk and groundwater flood risk. The Environment Agency, for example, under the Act became responsible for reservoir flooding and fluvial flooding. And that meant that we had various different responsibilities that we have to achieve. And so this report goes into what we've achieved over the last year, or since we last came to the Overview and Scrutiny Committee. So what I'll do is I'll just run through the report and just explain a bit more about each item, and then we can move on to questions afterwards. So the first achievement and item on the report is about the completion of the Surface Water Management Plan for Early. So as a lead local flood authority, we have to carry out surface water management plans for all of the town and parishes within the borough that are at major surface water flood risk. So last time we came to the committee, we had just carried one out for Shinfield, and this time round we have just carried one out for Early. So the idea of the surface water management plan is that it highlights, in consultation with the town council as well as residents, Thames Water and the Environment Agency and any other stakeholders, it highlights where the issues are with surface water flood risk, and then it looks to make recommendations as to how we can reduce that flood risk in future. So in Early, there are a number of recommendations that were made to try and reduce flood risk, and we are in the process of carrying out those actions to reduce surface water flood risk. One of which is to remove the culvert at Egremont Drive, which was posing risk to residents who live on Egremont Drive and also causing problems with the footpath. So we've resolved that issue now, but then there's a much larger long-term scheme that we're looking at, and we'll be working with Early Town Council on, which is to deliver a natural flood risk management scheme just downstream of Maiden Early Lake. The idea of that is to store water downstream of Maiden Early Lake in the hope that it will reduce surface water flood risk elsewhere in the town. So moving forward, as I say, we intend on carrying out surface water management plans for all of the town and parishes that are at risk. And this coming financial year, we will be carrying out one for Hurst. Hurst has experienced quite a significant amount of surface water flooding recently, most notably within the last couple of weeks after the heavy rain. And it also had surface water flooding just before Christmas, and also following Storm Ciara and Storm Dennis, which we had back in February of last year. So if we move on to item 2, which is emergency response to flooding and subsequent section 19 incident reports. As a highways authority, and because we own a significant amount of highways drainage across the borough, and going back to our responsibility in relation to surface water and groundwater flooding, we are responsible for flooding during emergency events when there's flooding across the borough. So our highways contractor will go out and deliver sandbags, etc. We've recently had to do that in the last couple of weeks, and then several times last year. And as I say, back when we had Storm Dennis and Storm Ciara. As a result of the flooding, if we've had to close a road because there's water crossing the road and it's dangerous, or we've had to help a property at risk which is flooded internally, we will then have to carry out what's called a Section 19 flood investigation report. So it's very similar to the surface water management plan, but on a much smaller scale. So what it does is we get our consultant to investigate what caused the flooding to that particular property or a road that we had to close, and then identify what can be done to reduce that in future. So we had to do that back in February last year for Greenswood Lane, Church Lane and Reading Road in Arborfield, and also Bath Road, Knoll Hill. And more recently, the flooding that we had a couple of weeks ago, we have just instigated the Section 19 reports required as a result of those flooding events. And then what we do is we make those reports publicly available if we're required to make them publicly available, and then we carry out the recommendations as a result to avoid the flooding happening in future. Moving on to item 3, this is in relation to CCTV drainage surveys and repair works that we've carried out over the last year. So COVID has actually presented an opportunity for the drainage team in some respect, because where normally we wouldn't be able to carry out drainage works, or it'd be a lot more difficult because of roads with high volumes of traffic going along them, because it's been a lot quieter, we've actually been able to get in and do works where we've wanted to or needed to carry it out for a while but haven't been able to because of the restrictions in relation to other works going on nearby, or the fact that we're restricted to off-peak working. So that's been really beneficial, and we've been able to carry out CCTV works to several roads, which I've listed within the report. And by CCTV works, what that means is we put a camera into the piped system, the piped highways drainage system, which then records the condition of the pipe system, and then we can have a look and see where works are required, and subsequently we will carry out those works. So whether that's lining the pipe, carrying out route ingress works, or replacement of the pipe system as well. So we've managed to do all of that within the last year, which has we hope reduced the number of reports of flooding incidents as a result in those locations. And we're starting to see, I'll go on to it later in the report, but we are starting to see a reduction in the number of reports in certain areas as a result. So that's been really positive. Moving on to item 4, we've delivered a number of capital drainage schemes on top of all the CCTV works that we've managed to do. So, for example, we have carried out replacement of systems or installation of new systems on Lower Wokingham Road, Gypsy Lane and Egremont Drive, as well as Red Hatch Drive as well. So that's been really positive, and looking to the next financial year, we are hoping to deliver capital drainage schemes on Barkham Ride, Broadwater Lane, Ball Lane and Church Lane in Shinfield. Moving on to item 5, we've had ongoing drainage maintenance and revenue works. So the contractor has emptied over 40,000 gullies, and we continue to measure the silt levels within all of our gullies. So when they go out to empty the gullies, they will record what percentage of the gully is full of silt, and then we feed that information into our online asset register, which is really useful, because then when we review our gully emptying programme on an annual basis, we're able to tailor the programme to where there's more silt build up. So where we get gullies which silt up much more regularly, we will then change the programme so that those particular areas are cleaned much more frequently. I've also included within this section that we have had in the last year 1,045 drainage reports from residents that we've responded to. So whether that be replacing a gully, replacing a manhole, replacing sections of pipe, etc. And something that's worth noting in this section is that in the last time I came to Overview and Scrutiny Committee, we were reporting 1,245 reports from residents. So the number has dropped over the last year, and we can potentially attribute that to the changes that we've made to the gully cleansing programme, as well as some of the CCTV works that we've done as well, because the numbers dropped. Having said that, the amount of rainfall that we've had over the last year has increased, so that's really positive as well. If I move on to item 6, which is about commenting on planning applications in relation to flooding and drainage. So as a statutory consultee, we are required to comment on planning applications in relation to flood risk from surface water and flood risk from groundwater. So the drainage team commented on 632 planning applications in relation to surface water and groundwater flood risk over the last year. And that's actually gone up as well since I last came to the committee. So the last time I came, I think we were reporting about 400, just over 400 planning applications that we'd commented on. And so we're looking at well over 100, almost 200 planning application increase, which is really good as well. So item 7 is about smart drainage trials. So this is something that we've recently started, and I know I've just spoken to you about how we monitor silt levels and then proactively empty the gullies. Well, the idea of the smart drainage trials that we're doing at the moment is that in 3 locations we're doing a pilot study. So in Gypsy Lane, Wilderness Road in Early, and then Reading Road in Arborfield, we have put sensors into the gullies on those roads, and those sensors feed back into our asset register, our online asset register, and they proactively notify us when the silt level has got to a certain point. So what's really useful about that is that we can then proactively go out and empty the gullies before it's caused an issue and a resident is reporting flooding to us. So the idea of this scheme is, if it's successful, we will roll that out on a much larger scale across the borough, and we'll be able to proactively maintain the gullies rather than reactively responding where there's reports of flooding or issues from residents. Moving on to item 8 and the manhole inventory. So over the last few years, we have been collecting data and inspecting all of our 5,000 highways manholes that we've got in relation to drainage. And this has been really useful because up until very recently, we didn't have all of the information on the manholes, so we wouldn't necessarily know in which direction a pipe would go or how many inlets or outlets there were into the manhole, what type of manhole it was, how deep it is, etc. And that's been able to help us build up a really clear picture of the drainage system across the borough, and we've again recorded all that information on our online asset register. Then item 9 is in relation to our partnership with Thames Water to reduce surface water flood risk. So in some locations across the borough, our highways drainage system is combined with Thames Water's surface water drainage system. So rather than having 2 separate piped systems, we've got 1 pipe system, and this is typically historical, where housing developments were built a long time ago and the systems were combined. But we're seeing in those locations sometimes an increase in flood risk as a result. And so we are working with Thames Water really closely to identify these locations and then deliver schemes in partnership with them to reduce that flood risk. And Thames Water are funding the delivery of those schemes. So over the next 2 years, we're expecting and even more capital schemes to be delivered. Item 10 is in relation to designation of additional flood defence structures. So this is an item that has been on here before, and it's ongoing. So it's just a reminder that we continue to designate flood risk structures that the council feel have an impact on flood risk if they're not maintained properly. Also, what it does is it means that the owner of that particular asset can't do anything to the asset without the prior consent of the local authority. So, for example, in new developments, we have designated filter strips which have been put in people's back gardens. So without the designation of those filter strips, people who are moving in and buying those houses wouldn't necessarily know that they've got a key drainage feature within their back garden. And we've seen in the past where people decide that they're going to turf over the filter strip or put a hot tub or something or a shed on top of it. So in designating it, it means we can avoid that and people understand their responsibility to maintain it. It also gives us the powers to go in or use emergency powers to go onto the land and carry out emergency works if necessary. So we continue to designate. And then item 11, again, that's been on the report before, and it's in relation to our responsibility to maintain an asset register of all of the assets within the borough in relation to flood risk and drainage. So we use an ArcGIS system to record all of these assets. We've actually now moved that to an online system, which is called Map 16, and it holds all of our asset data as well as the information behind that about the condition of the asset, etc. And so I think that concludes, that's all 11 items that are on there. So that's just an overview of the report and some of the things that we've been doing. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Francesca. Before we go to any questions, Falila, do you want to say anything here, as we very kindly invited you? Well, as always, we invite you to this meeting whenever we got the flood risk stuff, because your input is invaluable. Members, if you do want questions, put your hands up.
Yeah, there's nothing like a nice bit of buttering up. Thanks, Fran. That was good, and I have to, particularly the asset register. That probably is meaningless to a lot of people, but it's actually so critical, both in terms of on new developments, but also retrospectively as well, because a lot of these flood assets are actually hidden, dips in the ground or whatever, and people don't realise what they are until it's they fill it in and it's all too late. Just going back with a couple of questions, really, Fran. The item 1, so the Egremont Drive and the culvert, and particularly the NFM feature in Maiden early. I think that's brilliant to hear. That's really fundamental. But when all that work was going on, without wanting to mention areas, but there's obviously been internal flooding further down that ditch or segments or down towards the river. Was the modelling of all of that inclusive of the reach down there? Because the last thing I'd want is people in that area to flood again.
There goes one of my questions.
It's a really good point, because we were concerned that if we were to carry out works at Egremont Drive to remove the culvert, basically the culvert is acting as a bottleneck. So although it's causing flooding at that particular location on Egremont Drive because it's blocking the flow, if we remove that, it could then potentially lead to problems downstream. So that was something that we were really conscious of the whole time. And whilst our consultant WSP were carrying out the works, we made sure that they included all of that within the modelling to make sure that any removal of the culvert wouldn't have an impact downstream, because in the past, as you rightly say, down Gypsy Lane, there's been flooding, and then that flooded over the road and then into the field next to it, and the council then ended up having to dig a ditch to intercept water down there. So we were very conscious of that, and we've carried out various measures to make sure that that doesn't happen, and the modelling work showed us that as well.
Oh, will that be modelled? Because models are fantastic, and where would we be without them? But they are models. Yeah. So is there going to be a few visual inspections? I'm mainly concerned about the internal flooding of the people down there, because it's obviously devastated is not too strong a word to use.
Definitely, that's a really good point. So our contractor monitors it on a weekly basis. So it's actually, that's the most that our contractor goes out. Usually they carry out inspections on a monthly basis in other at-risk locations in the borough, because that's the need, that's felt to be the required amount of time. But in this particular location, they go out on a weekly basis to check that there's nothing blocking anything along that system. And also, if we get reports that there's potentially going to be flooding, we will send them out proactively to go and check and make sure and keep monitoring as the rainfall happens.
Perfect. And then the NFM feature should hopefully actually reduce that. I've got a question around item 2. I know it's been in flooding. And obviously the mechanism that goes in place with the reports, etc. What about support for the people that flood? Is there what kind of ongoing support? Because unfortunately, having water in your lounge is only the beginning of flooding for many of these people.
Yeah, so we're working with the emergency planning team at the council to try and set up as many groups as possible, support groups. So, for example, in Swallowfield, we have the Swallowfield Flood Resilience Group, and then we've worked with a number of different volunteers across the borough in various different locations. So we've got a list of flood action volunteers for various different locations across the borough, and we liaise with those people to assist anybody who's at risk of flooding, or to report back to us proactively about issues of flooding. So what we do is speak to them on a regular basis, and they're also they're champions within their particular location to assist residents who are at risk of flooding or who have flooded in the past and have concerns about it. But it's a really good point that flooding, it has a longer lasting psychological impact on people. So engagement with residents, especially if they're still living at flood risk, is really important, and that's why we're trying to be as proactive as possible to approach the town and parish councils and volunteers as well to set up these flood resilience groups so that people can have support within their own communities. The Swallowfield Flood Resilience Group is a really good example of that. So, for example, we just had the flooding that we just had a couple of weeks ago. There were a number of areas that experienced flooding, and we were getting contacted by the Swallowfield Flood Resilience Group to say, "Oh, this area's got a problem. Can you come and respond?" Which was really helpful for us because it highlighted the problems that we needed to respond to. But at the same time, they were out on the ground helping those people. Which was really helpful for the residents. So I think that community, the community dialogue and the group is really key, and something that we're working on with the emergency planning team to set up elsewhere in the borough. But as you'll be aware, a lot of the time it's difficult if we haven't had flooding for a while. People often try to ignore the fact that they might be at flood risk, and understandably so, because they don't want to think about it. So until we have the flooding, that's when it brings it up again, and people reignite and their thoughts about it and setting up the groups, etc. But it's difficult to get that kind of support. I guess support's the wrong word, but that interest from people without having the flooding, which is
it's a self-preservation instinct, I think, from the research I've done. Don't forget, though, the National Flood Forum can help in that regard. I've got a load of other questions, but I'll finish on one, and I'll email you all. We'll go out for that coffee. So in terms of the planning, one of the things that I and a lot of other flood groups notice in the area is that the developments often don't go up in the way the plans originally envisaged them to go up. They go up in different orders, or different things happen, so assets don't actually end up where they originally thought they were going to be, or functioning in the way they should be in the right order. Now, how is that monitored so that we don't end up with a scenario at the end of the day where we've actually got a development that's gone up that isn't exactly what was planned because the things have changed, and now that means that our flood assets aren't quite what we want them to be? How is that monitored?
Yeah, so that's a really good point as well. So when I started back at the council, which was about 5 years ago, the flooding team only had 2 people in it, and now we've got 6. So that increase in resource has dramatically helped us to be able to go out and monitor what's being delivered on site and inspect the flood assets that have been delivered. So, for example, the attenuation basins, the swales, the filter drains, the manholes, the pipes, etc., and make sure that it is as per the approved drawings. But also, one thing that has been really useful as well is that a lot of residents actually report this back to us, where we haven't been able to get on site, and then the drainage officers will be able to go out and check it accordingly. So we're as proactive as we can be on development sites, but we also do have the residents as well, who have provided a really invaluable resource to be able to notify us where they've noticed, oh, actually that looks like it's in the wrong location, or it doesn't look like the approved plans. So that's been really useful as well.
And I'd be tempted to push that quite, because I mean the locals' experiential knowledge is that it's lived, etc. And if they see changes they weren't expecting, so I'd be tempted to promote that a bit more, to make people aware that actually not only should they be doing that, but actually it's helping to do that. It's not like complaining. It's actually a positive.
Yeah, definitely.
And I'll email you some other questions if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Thanks, Fran.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to go to the hands I saw go up in order. So Paul first, then.
Thank you, Guy, and thank you, Fran, for your presentation, and thank you to Fiala as well for asking 2 of my questions I've got listed here. But I do have more. Could you provide a programme of when each area is actually going to receive a surface water management plan? And I know Hurst is next. But what's the criteria used to create the priority list? That's my first part. And the second part of that question is, if you're doing each parish town area and you're only doing one a year, because you mentioned Shinfield was 2019, Early is 2020, that's going to take about 17 years to do the whole of the borough. So that's my first part of my questions.
Oh, yeah, okay.
I've got more, but if you do
okay,
that
no, that's fine, yeah. So in terms of priority, so what we use is historical reports of flooding, as well as using the surface water flood risk maps that we get hold of from the council, and some of the modelling works that we've done ourselves. So over the last several years, we've had significant reports of issues in Hurst. We also have to respond to a significant number of calls from residents, and have had various properties that have flooded as a result and had to close roads as a result. So we use a mixture of the information in relation to Section 19 flood investigation reports, historical reports of flooding, as well as the historical and current surface water flood risk maps as well, and then the number of reports of residents in relation to flood risk and our contractors responding. So yeah, as you say, we've been doing one a year, and that's in relation to the amount of funding that we get from central government to carry it out. So every year we get a set amount of funding. It's about £30,000, which we use to carry out surface water management plans for the different town and parishes that are at risk. But that's not to say that we don't still carry out works in other places. So for example, this year we've carried out surface water flood risk management plan for Early, but having said that, a lot of our capital works that we've carried out and the CCTV works are elsewhere in the borough. So it's not that we're forgetting about other areas in the borough, we're certainly not. We're just using the funds that we get from central government in a particular year for a particular area based on the information that we've got in relation to historical flooding.
Okay, thank you for that. Yeah, because it was more around creating that surface water management plan is the bit I was after. And yeah, I acknowledge there's work done elsewhere. But you mentioned about Section 19 reports, and you've got quite a few of those completed. The A329 Reading Road and Lower Early Way at Showcase Roundabout, Winnersh, was closed on the 17th of February 2020, just over a year ago, due to flooding because of Storm Dennis. Is there a reason why that location has not been included in investigations?
So we are quite certain of the cause of flooding on the roundabout at Showcase Roundabout. So it's basically when the river backs up into the gullies and the drainage system that are connected to the roundabout. So we know what the cause is, and we have a scheme that we're looking at to try and reduce the flood risk to that location, which is in the form of the natural flood risk management scheme that we're looking at south of the M4. So that's why we haven't done a particular Section 19 flood investigation for that, because really the Section 19 flood investigations are where we don't know what the problem is, and so we need engineers to come out and investigate and then identify how we can fix that. But in the case of Showcase Roundabout, we know what the problem is. We've got a scheme that we're looking to deliver. It's just a case of finding the funding and the liaison with the stakeholders to be able to do that.
Okay, thank you. A big thank you also to officers and the contractors for getting all the CCTV drainage work done and surveys done in 2020, whilst we had the reduced traffic on the roads, and with the high autumn and winter rainfall. I think the proof's been in the pudding on that, because there hasn't been any flooding in those particular locations, which I certainly know of. Just a little bit of feedback really for the future. I think it'd be very useful, the likes of Finchampstead Road, if you had put the A road or its classification on there, because it really highlights how important some of those roads are where you've actually done some works on there. Just on gully emptying, I've got a major issue, as you know, with gully emptying, particularly on certain B-class roads through Winnersh. And I have taken that up separately with officers, so I won't highlight that too much here, but there is a problem, particularly where they've been blocked for quite a specific period, and quite clearly they're not being visited, but we'll discuss that further on Thursday when we meet. On the, just one other thing really, you've mentioned on page 9.9 about where the Thames Water and the highway drainage systems coexist together because they were built umpteen years ago, and you're looking at partnership type working to reduce flooding. Could you give a couple of examples of what actually might get achieved in particular locations where you've got this single drainage system at the moment?
Yeah, so what we'd be looking at ideally is using SUDs to reduce flood risk. So rather than having it all in one piped system underground, which is a lot more difficult to identify when there's any problems, we want to move towards using sustainable drainage systems. So typically above ground systems where you can store water, but you can also create multiple benefits. So it creates amenity value, water quality enhancements, biodiversity value as well. So what we'd really be looking at is locations where we can divert the water from the pipe system into a green open space area, hold the water in that location, and then either move it off through a ditch system or bring it back into the pipe system, but we've allowed it to be stored for a duration of time so that it's not overwhelmed the system and caused flooding.
Super. I've got one more, if I may.
That's all right.
Just on page 10, section 21 asset register, could you confirm if that would include dams such as Bearwood Lakes, and therefore that's included in the Borough Council's emergency plan?
So we don't have any of the dams recorded on the asset register formally because they're recorded through the Reservoirs Act and the Flood and Water Management Act on the Environment Agency's asset registers.
So you do
yeah. So
okay, that's it. Thank you very much, Guy. Thank you, Fran, for all your answers.
Thank you, Paul. And once again, that's as I mentioned, the grey areas in the Act. The next person I saw whose hand shut up was Shirley.
Thank you, Guy. Thank you, Fran. That was an interesting report, as ever. Couple of questions. The year before now, in October 2019, when you came, I expressed concern about residents who pave over their front gardens and the impact that has. And at the time, the answer I was given was that there was a sub-strategy agreed, and that there was a lot of weight behind the sub-strategy. And the team were working with householder applicants to ensure that conditions were followed. I'm still seeing a lot of front gardens disappearing under tarmac or concrete. Particularly in my ward, there are an awful lot of them. And part of the issue is that the people want to put on a couple of extra bedrooms. And once there's a couple of extra bedrooms, the planners insist on a couple of extra parking spaces. So suddenly the front garden has gone, and what I'd like to see, and I have no idea how much influence that you have on policy, is that perhaps there was a kind of a ratio, that a percentage of a front garden that has to remain green, that we could have something like that in the borough, because it is important that we've got this runoff from these hard surfaces, because every time you lose a front garden to hard surfaces, there's more scope for flooding somewhere else further down the road, basically. And I wondered if that was something that had been considered at all, or whether it was something that is possible. That's question one, if you want to do that one first.
Yeah, no, it's a really valid point, because as you say, like, it might not, on a smaller scale, like, so one household doing it might not have a significant impact. But if you combine the let's say 1,000 residents do it, and you combine that space, it becomes a massive area that used to be able to drain water and infiltrate it through the ground to hard standing areas that just allow water to run off and then cause surface water flood risk. So we have looked at it, and as you say, we've been looking at it for a significant amount of time. And the planning officers, where possible, note or provide an informative which highlights that we really try and avoid this where possible. We're also, because it's, as you say, we haven't been as successful because people are still doing it. And also, you don't necessarily have to have planning permission to do it. So people might end up doing it anyway, and we've got no control about that. So what we have been doing is working with the other Berkshire authorities to see whether there's a Berkshire-wide policy that we can introduce, or some Berkshire-wide comms that we can do at a Berkshire scale, to try and encourage people not to do that, or if they're going to do that, put in other measures, like, for example, having a water butt, or putting in some sort of measures within their back garden to attenuate the water, so that it doesn't just simply run off and then cause more flood risk. But it's not just an issue within Wokingham, it's much further afield. Other Berkshire authorities have highlighted it as well, and combined it causes an issue. So it's certainly something that we're working on and working with the other authorities to try and deal with. We've also spoken to the local plan team about whether there's some kind of wording within the update to the local plan which can try and steer people away from tarmacking over their front drives, or if they're going to do that, putting in permeable paving rather than block paving, because at least permeable paving allows the water to infiltrate through the ground. And our SUD strategy that we adopted a couple of years ago as well steers residents away from doing that, and offers alternative options. So, yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Well, it does. I'll watch this space with interest. In fact, one of my comments on the local plan update was about this very thing, about how we could claw back some control, really, over what people were doing to front gardens. So that's really good. The other question I had was more general about water tables. And I remember a few years ago there was a great concern because water tables had fallen greatly, and a lot of people who get their water from boreholes were struggling to get water and so on. I'm kind of assuming that water levels in water tables have now possibly risen to more satisfactory levels. In fact, possibly more than satisfactory. Would that be the case?
Yeah, definitely. So, as you say, a few years ago, we were told they brought in hosepipe bans, and there was a real concern about the aquifers and groundwater levels, etc., because we'd had a prolonged period of drought. However, the last couple of years we've had a significant amount of rain, more than we've had for some time. I think Storm Dennis and Storm Ciara, we saw the wettest, I think, 48 hours on record as well. So that certainly helped to increase the groundwater levels and the water table. Actually, in some places in Wokingham, particularly in North Wokingham, by North Wokingham I mean the town Wokingham, there is groundwater levels which are at ground level. So yeah, normally you'd see it depending on the location, but between about a metre probably below ground. But in some places we've actually got it at ground level. So that just shows that the groundwater table at the moment is relatively stable. But that can change if we have a really dry period. Then we might have the same situation again. And the water companies might be saying to us that they've got issues. But yeah, I think at the moment, given the amount of rain that we've had, we've got quite a high groundwater table at the moment. Yeah. And I think that partly contributed to the flooding that we've had in the last couple of weeks, because we've had so much rain, the groundwater table has risen, and then the rain that's added to that hasn't been able to go anywhere because the groundwater table is so high, the water's just infiltrated to a point and then it can't go anywhere else. So it's just run off as surface water and caused flooding.
Yeah, I was just going to say, that's the disadvantage of water tables getting back to where they were.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that we're now going to have flooding. And thank you for that. And the last thing I wanted to say really quickly was just a small observation about on item 9. We're talking about working closely with Thames Water, and I'd been working closely with them on a problem in my ward for some months, and these were large pipes that were silted up. And I have to say, and I don't know if it's been other people's experience, but they've been brilliant at communication. Every time they visit the pipes, I get an email telling me exactly what they've done in the pipes and what they're going to do next, and so on. So I just thought, well, credit where credit's due. It's actually, I was quite impressed.
Yeah. If you get a reference number when you call up and speak to them, it's really useful, because then every time you speak to them, you just refer back to that reference number and they record everything via that. So any operative that you speak to will just be able to read from that reference number all the update notes that have been provided. So it's really useful in that sense.
Yeah, no, they seem to have got their act together really well, and my residents are delighted now because the road used to run like a river, and now it all goes down the gullies and disappears. So it's a win-win for everyone.
I'll pass on the thanks to Thames Water, Shirley, as one of my best friends is the head of the customer service response teams at Thames Water from my university days. So I know the right person.
Maybe borough councillors are getting preferential treatment on your account then, Guy.
No, I'm not had a clue. I don't get involved.
I was going to say, we'll come to you if we've got any problems.
Yeah, indeed. Well, thank you very much, Francesca. That's okay. Really helpful. Thank you.
Oh, sorry, is that me?
Yep, that's you.
Oh, thank you, Chair. Hi.
Hello.
Hiya. It's all good news so far. If I could, under Section 21 asset registered, there has been a problem, well, not a problem for several years in Sanford Lane, as we are well. But you touched on you're going into Hurst, but when you're going to come to my ward, Loddon, which I represent in Woodley, that's one of my questions. And other thing is the database, which is you record information, ARCGIS. So when our resident called, we got problem in front of our door or in our street. Do you get the statistics, like how many jobs you've done and how many yet to finish in a yearly basis, so we get some ideas when we talk to our resident? And the third one, there's quite a few houses in Loddon Bridge Road which floods by the garden, with the river overflow. Yeah, is there anything you can do or you're planning to do in the future? And thirdly, South Lake, if this lake overflows, who's responsible for the if emergency happen and this start to overflows? Is it the Borough Council or is it the environmental agency?
Okay, I've written 4 questions down, so I will go through one at a time. So you mentioned Sanford Lane. Sanford Lane floods on a regular basis. We have to close it. The problem with Sanford Lane is that it basically crosses 2 sections of river, and so it's fluvial flooding that causes the problem. In order to fix the problem with Sanford Lane, we would either have to raise the road out of the floodplain, and in order to do that, we would then have to compensate for the material that we're putting to raise it out of the floodplain. We'd have to compensate for that elsewhere immediately next to the floodplain. And there's no suitable location nearby that we can do that for the volume that would be required. So as I was mentioning when I was talking to Paul, we are looking at a much more large scale natural flood risk management scheme for the borough, and that will involve hopefully reducing flood risk to not only the Showcase Cinema roundabout, but various different roads further downstream as well. And so it's hoped that there will be a benefit in relation to Sanford Lane and that scheme, because the idea of the scheme is to hold back water downstream of the M4 motorway, which means that water is released much slower down to get towards the River Thames, and as a result, the roads that are affected by flooding further downstream will be less affected, if not affected at all. So that's a really large-scale natural flood risk management scheme that we're looking to deliver, which requires a significant amount of funding and stakeholder engagement at the moment. So we've started the stakeholder engagement with the landowners, which is going really positively, but we are now looking for funding to be able to deliver it. We've just submitted an application to DEFRA for their Innovative Flood Resilience Fund, which is a fund of, I think, about 250 million, which they're going to separate between 25 different authorities. So we've made an application for the funding. If we're successful, that money will be able to help us deliver that natural flood risk management scheme, and hopefully, as a result, take Sanford Lane out of the floodplain and allow it to be passable during flooding events. So I hope that answers the question in relation to Sanford Lane. Unfortunately, it's not a quick fix. It's not because of the mechanisms of flooding are so different to the mechanisms that we've been talking about in relation to surface water flood risk and groundwater flood risk. It's a much more difficult problem to fix because it relates to the river, and the river obviously cuts straight through Sanford Lane. So it's a longer term fix that we're looking at, but it's certainly on our horizon, and we're working towards getting that scheme going. So I hope that answers that question. The second item, you talked about ArcGIS and our assets. So yeah, all of our assets are on ArcGIS and the asset register. On Map 16, which is an online system. So we record all of that information. It includes, as you were asking, the information in relation to how many times we've had to go out to a particular drainage asset. So, for example, if the contractor has to go out and empty a gully on a reactive basis, that will be recorded on the system as well. So we can certainly provide, if you want it via the Overview and Scrutiny Committee, or if you want it, if all members want it on a, let's say, annual basis, we can provide the information and statistics in relation to where they're going to, how many times they've had to respond, etc. Then you've talked about Loddon Bridge Road. So
Yeah.
I think, if I'm right, the Loddon Bridge Road is a private road,
No.
which...
No, it's not private road. It's a huge road. The other side is river by the Showcase Cinema.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm
bridge.
thinking of... That's it. Yeah, I'm thinking of Loddon Drive, completely different.
No.
They both begin with L. Yeah, so you said that there's a number of properties that are at risk there. So I think they're quite near to the River Loddon. So they'll either be at flood risk from the river, or they'll be at flood risk from surface water. So we can certainly look at how we can help them to reduce flood risk. If it's fluvial, then the scheme that I've just mentioned in relation to natural flood risk management south of the M4 will hopefully be able to reduce flood risk for them. And if it's surface water, it will be in relation to the highways drains or Thames water surface water drains outside. We have done a significant amount of the work there in the past. So if they're still flooding in relation to surface water flood risk, then that's interesting and something that I'll take away, and we can have a look at further. But if it's in relation to the river, then
it is definitely in relation to the river, because river every time rains, it does flood.
If it's in relation to the river, then they're at risk of fluvial flooding. So as I mentioned at the beginning, the Environment Agency coordinate the response to fluvial flood risk. But having said that, because there are various highways infrastructure and properties at risk within the borough, the council has decided and come up with its own natural flood risk management scheme south of the M4 that we're looking to get funding for, which will help fluvial flooding in those locations. So. But again, it's a longer term fix, because river flooding is much more difficult to fix than replacing a section of pipe. And then the last thing you've mentioned is South Lake. So again, I think this is in relation to reservoirs. I think, but I'll have to come back to you on this, I think South Lake is the council's responsibility. I think it's run and maintained by Place Clienting or Countryside Services. But just more generally, I'll have to check whether it is the council's or not, because it's outside of my team's remit. But if it is the council's, then as landowner, the council will be responsible for making sure that that various reports are carried out under the Reservoirs Act, and that various measures are in place to reduce flood risk from the reservoir. If it's not the council's, then it's the landowner's responsibility, whoever the landowner may be, to have all of that in place.
Right. And finally, you touched on DEFRAs. This we've been talking about this Showcase roundabout, flooding, which is a very big major problem for the almost our borough. Have you made any sort of application for grant, because it's about 80-90 million pound project here? The Highway England, do they have responsibility over, or we as a borough have to maintain this? It's a huge project to mitigate this problem.
Yeah, so as I was just saying, in relation to the natural flood risk management scheme, so the council, I think back in 2014, members recognised that there were a number of highways within the borough that required a solution to the flooding, because the river obviously crosses from south to north within the borough, and then a number of our major highways, including Showcase Roundabout and Reading Road, cross from east to west or vice versa. And that means that when we have a fluvial flooding event, those roads are affected, and we either have to close them, or people still try and go through them, but there's quite a lot of water on them, which is dangerous in itself. So I think it was recognised back then that something needed to be done in relation to reducing flood risk, despite fluvial flood risk being the overall responsibility of the Environment Agency. So what we've done since then is to look at what different schemes we could potentially implement to try and reduce flood risk for these particular roads. And there's been various different schemes looked at, ranging in cost. And for example, one of the schemes was to raise the whole of Lower Early Way and put a series of culverts underneath it, which was going to cost a significant amount of money and also cause a huge amount of disruption for the road for a year or longer. And so that wasn't feasible. We then looked at options to have about 50 different pocket ponds at various points along the River Loddon, where we would divert water out of the River Loddon and store the water, which would hopefully then reduce the flood risk to the roads further downstream. And that wasn't feasible because we couldn't find enough land to be able to do it. So there's been various schemes that we've looked at, and the scheme that we're pressing ahead with, which the modelling is suggesting will have a positive impact for those roads that I mentioned and Showcase Roundabout, is to deliver a natural flood risk management scheme, which is holding water south of the motorway, south of the M4, so basically restricting the flow of the River Loddon underneath the motorway. And then that is shown to reduce flood risk to the roundabout, as well as Sanford Lane and various other roads, A321 Wargrave Road. It will likely have positive impact on houses on Loddon Bridge Road as well. So we have, as I say, submitted an application within the last month to DEFRA for grant funding for that project.
Thank you. Thank you, Guy.
Thank you for that, Abdul. Clive?
Yeah, thank you, Guy. Thank you, Fran, for the report. Very, very good, as ever. And special thanks for sorting out Egremont Drive, because that's something that hadn't been done for quite a while until you really got involved in it last at the end of the summer, the beginning of the autumn, and had it sorted out for Christmas. So really good. So thank you very much. Coming back to the natural flood risk management scheme that you've been telling us about, we were hopeful of getting funding from another area, weren't we? I guess that hasn't happened.
Yes, so we applied for Thames Water funding. We got shortlisted. We were one of two authorities that had been shortlisted. We were up against the I think it's Cherwell District Council.
Oh, right.
But they applied as part of Oxford, and we didn't hear. We've only just recently heard back from them, but we hadn't heard for about a year and a half. And they kept stalling the decision, and it turns out that they've had to reduce significantly the number of authorities that they're offering funding to. So they were originally going to be offering funding to 9 authorities, and they've had to reduce it down to 3 authorities. Because of issues to do with COVID, and also they had several issues with their 5-year plan, which they have to submit to Ofwat. When we were applying for the funding, they were being scrutinised really heavily by Ofwat, and I think they had some issues in other areas which they had to focus on. So unfortunately, we didn't get the funding in this particular case, which was really upsetting, since we'd got so close. And thought we were going to get it.
You were quite positive about it as well, weren't you?
Yeah.
So when do you think that we might get a reply from DEFRA if we've only just made the application?
Yeah, so we're hoping to hear in April whether we've been successful in going to the next stage. So we've just submitted our expression of interest. If we get through to the next stage, we have to submit a business case. And I think we're in a good position in that our scheme is quite well developed, whereas they have been speaking to other authorities who just have an idea of a scheme that they might want to deliver, whereas we've already done a feasibility and modelling works of the scheme that we've done. So we've provided all that information. We hope that will will help with the application, but we'll have to wait and see. I don't want to be too positive because we were for the Thames Water one and that didn't pan out. So but I have to say, since hearing that we weren't successful in relation to the original funding from Thames Water, they've since said that they were really impressed with the application and the work that we're already doing in the borough, and that's why we've created this partnership with them in relation to the combined systems, and so they've said that they have a minimum of £125,000 available to Wokingham to be able to carry out surface water schemes in partnership with them, but if more's required, then they can look to be able to help us with that as well. The trouble with that is we can't use that funding to deliver the natural flood risk management scheme because it's in relation to surface water flooding rather than fluvial flooding.
Yeah. But the good thing about what you've told us as well is that your discussions with the landowner has been going well.
Yeah, really positive,
very positive,
making progress as well. Yeah.
Okay. You talked about drainage channels on new development and some of them appearing in new residents' back gardens, and obviously the developer doesn't bother to tell the person that they've got a channel in their back garden, and they probably don't even put turf down or anything until people are in, and they get it 4 or 5 weeks later. I think that's what generally happens. But wouldn't it be better if we just didn't build where there's a risk of flooding?
So in response to that, with regards to surface water flooding, I actually think building developments can have a significant or can lead to a significant reduction in surface water flood risk because we're putting in the infrastructure to be able to manage it. So with regards to what I was referring to in relation to the channels in people's back gardens, that is not something that we would typically allow. It happened before any of the current drainage team were at the council, but in order to avoid that in future, we've increased the number of people within the drainage team so that they can really look at the details of the planning applications and make sure things like that don't happen. So in that particular instance, we didn't have a lot of choice, but in order to avoid any increased risk of flooding because it's in people's back gardens and they might then decide to turf over it, etc., we decided that we would designate it. And in designating it, it appears on the land charges of the property. So when the residents buy that property, they'll be notified that this is within their back garden and they have a responsibility to maintain it. And it also gives us, as I say, the emergency powers to clear or enter onto their land to carry out works if necessary. But generally, where new developments are being built, we can implement these SUD schemes which are designed to deal with the surface water. So whereas before it wouldn't have been, it's not positively being managed, it's just infiltrating through the ground. With new developments, we can put in these SUD schemes with swale systems, above ground attenuation, which not only provide surface water flood risk management, but also they deal with, or they provide amenity value to residents. They deal with water quality improvements. They provide biodiversity. So yeah, I don't.
But we can do all of this in other areas on the development rather than people's back gardens.
Yeah. So we moving forward after that, we avoid anything in people's back gardens.
Okay. All right. Well, hopefully there's not going to be any flooding. We're not going to have another March 1947 or anything like that coming up. How many sandbags do we have? Just in case there is an issue.
In the contract, I'll have to get the exact figures for you, but thinking off the top of my head, I think we have 1,500 filled sandbags in the contractor's yard filled, right, and then a further 4,000 which are empty and ready to be filled if required.
That is many more than what we had a couple of years ago.
Yeah, so now we've got a new contractor. Before the new contractor was put in place, we increased the number that the contractor was required to store.
Right, because my recollection was it was as low as 200.
Yeah, it was a couple
ones,
of
and about 800 unfilled.
It was a couple of hundred, yeah. But the problem that we had there was we had the flooding. I think it was 2000, is either 2010 or 2014, and officers ended up in the contractor's yard using highways cones to pour the sand into the bags, and it was taking so long to do that. And actually, we just needed to get the sandbags out really quickly to residents. So we increased the number that's required to be held by the contractor, and then obviously we've still got backup just in case.
Oh, that's really good. Could you just drop us an email? Let me know what it is.
Yeah, I will do.
Okay. And then just one final point. I certainly agree with Shirley that we need to try to do something about people paving over their front gardens. And I thought 5 or 6 years ago that we were saying to people that they couldn't pave over 100% of their front garden, that they could only do 80 or 90%. But if we can get something into the borough design guide when it gets looked at after we've done the local plan update, it would be really good. Yeah,
certainly the officers are definitely looking into that. We do where we can, if it comes up in a planning application, we will comment on it to get residents to avoid that, but it's where people are doing it and it hasn't come through planning application. And they just do it. That's the difficulty, and that's what other Berkshire authorities are finding, that people are just deciding, well, I don't want the grass there anymore, so I'm just going to turf over it. Put gravel over it, or even worse, tarmac over it, pave it.
And they can do that without any planning permission at all.
It has, I think, over a certain size they have to get planning permission, but if it's under a certain size they can do it without getting any permissions.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Clive. Parry, I see your hand shot up.
Thank you, Chair. I just primarily want to thank Fran for a first-class report and some very constructive and appropriate answers, and thank you for asking all the lovely questions. And just to support Fran, South Lake is part of my portfolio, and it is definitely Woking Borough Council responsibility. So if Abdul, if you've got any issues, please contact me. We can sort them out offline.
Thank you, Barry.
Thank you,
Barry. Most of my questions got answered. I agree. Secondly, what Clive said in regards to thank you for sorting out Egremont Drive. That's been a big help and has been a headache for some years. The only question I've got is one technical question that seems to have slipped through everyone else's question. And that is basically regarding gullying, emptying and silt in it, as it were. What is the actual cutoff in terms of a percentage that we actually need silted, the gullies being silted up, as it were? Because it's not something that I've ever heard an answer for. Is it above 30%, 40%, 50%? We're waiting until they're completely full. What is the number there? Because I know, having recently cleaned out guttering above my own guttering, I know exactly what the amount is that I need to get rid of each time.
So it's in relation to where the outlet is, or
yes.
the outlet into the pipe.
A mixture of both, outlet and inlet, effectively, because we know that stuff gets dumped when it's being chucked out of an outlet pipe, as it were.
So the percentages aren't in relation to how full the gully is. So you could have a gully pot which is 50% full, but that's not going to work at all if the outlet into the inlet into the drainage pipe system is completely covered. So the percentage is in relation to how much of the inlet or outlet is covered. And if it's over 50%, then we would straight away be going out. But if it's got if it's 50% or less, then there is enough space for it to be able to, or the water to drain away. But we would be more concerned if it's getting above 50%, because then there would be an issue. Having said that, in all the cases where we've been looking at and monitoring the silt levels, if it's gone above 20%, we'll go out and respond. So, I mean, typically it'll be 50%, but we're responding on a much lower basis. So.
Okay, yeah, and also thank you for the monitoring, because my experience in the last few years has been, especially in early, the flooding issues have not been, other than Egremont, which has been the problem area, the flooding issues, especially up like Wilderness Road and everything like that, haven't been caused by consistent rain. It's been caused by ridiculously heavy rain. So it's a flash flood problem where the gullies and everything are overwhelmed. So the fact that you're keeping tabs and basically if it's going above 20%, that is you're now basically dealing with it. That means you're mitigating as best as possible that aspect from flash flooding, because I mean there's my neighbours across the way. They have a major problem whenever we have the flash flooding that basically causes the big standing water and wilderness and everything, because the water comes down so fast it actually overwhelms the guttering and is running down the wall through lead and then getting into their kitchen via the exhaust pipe. That's literally the gutters are overwhelmed and it's coming down the wall and then in. That's the level of flash flooding I've talked about, where we've actually seen an impact as opposed to consistent rain like Storm Dennis and Storm Kiara or whatever it was.
Yeah, definitely. With Wilderness Road, we actually replaced a whole section of the system because it was so there were so many. Yeah, it was so compromised as a result of root ingress. So rather than replacing it with a piped system, we've used these curb drainage systems. And since we've put that in place, we've not been called out to problems along there. So that's really good. And likewise with Pepper Lane, there's always in the past been problems with flooding on the junction with Pepper Lane and Wilderness Road, and it transpires that there was a collapse in the pipe which runs underneath the properties on Wilderness Road and back towards Maiden Early Lakeway, and so that's been repaired as well. So but yeah, Wilderness Road's got the silt or the silt monitors at the moment, so we'll be able to monitor that even further.
Should be great, and it'll be interesting to know what the levels were. Personally, if we have another flash flood incident like we had in the summer, it's basically when the thunderstorms roll through. Okay, that's all my questions. So unless anyone else has anything else, put your hand up now. Other than that, Fran, thank you very much. Very comprehensive report. And yeah, if you've got nothing else, I think you can go and enjoy the rest of your evening.
Oh, brilliant!
We're covering something else later.
No. I think I'll go have my dinner now. Thank you, everyone. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Fran.
Thanks.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Delilah, if you want to stay, you're more than welcome to. But we're about to talk about the arts and culture strategy. But if you want to head off as well, your contribution is always welcome on this aspect. And thank you very much for taking the time out to come.
And thank you very much for inviting me. I will bow out because I have now to do work. So thank you very much.
I know that feeling all too well. Anyway, thank you very much. Have a very good evening.
You too. Bye.
Bye. Okay, arts and culture strategy. I believe Charlotte is taking the lead on this, and then we're going over to. I think Robin's one of the officers responsible. Charlotte, can you identify everyone else, please?
Yeah, let me just clarify for you. I'm going to be leading on this, and I'm supported by Grant Thornton, who's an officer at Woking Borough Council, and also my deputy chair, who is Robin Copps, who is a member from he's the chair of the Arts Society and has been working in partnership to support pulling this strategy together. And he's also helping a subgroup of this partnership, this alliance, as well. So in coordination with trying to get a piece of art outside the Carnival Hub. So I'll talk a little bit about what this is and how it's come about, and then I'll pass over to Grant and to Robin to talk a little bit about how they've come about and got involved as well. And Grant previously worked at Reading Borough Council in their arts and culture strategy and implementing much of the art and culture in the borough there. So just to give you a bit of context, we don't currently have an arts and culture strategy. So this is our first strategy. So it's pretty important document. We had a draft that we took through to executive last year, and that was approved there. And then we went out for consultation, and we got a very positive response from that. From that, the towns and parishes came back to us with responses. The general public did as well as arts and cultural organisations in the borough. But just to give you some context, that was in the sort of midst of COVID as well. So we would have liked to have had more, consultation responses, and in particular, we would like to have more responses from the young people of the borough, because one of the key priorities is to get to maximise opportunities for children and young people, and I think it's very difficult. They're probably quite hard to reach, particularly at the moment. Obviously they're not in schools, so we need to do more around that. So in October we formally formed the Art and Culture Alliance, and that's a partnership of different stakeholders who are driving forward this strategy, and from the strategy comes an action plan. And at the moment we're putting an action plan together for about 6 months, because with COVID, it's very difficult to plan arts and culture events, and as you can probably appreciate, and we're trying to put together different things, working with our partners that are COVID-proof, COVID-safe, and that will actually enhance what's going on already, and what's feasible actually in light of what's going on. So just to talk about the Alliance a little bit, it is cross-party, and as you've heard, Shirley is a member on that group, as is Sarah Kerr as well. We've got representation from theatre, arts and different cultural organisations, and officers represented from many different departments in the council as well. So it really is a group that's very representative of arts and culture across the borough. What I would like in future is representatives from other towns and parishes, because we're quite heavily representative from Wokingham Town, but in future it'd be nice to spread out a little bit further north, and that's something that I'm highlighting tonight. I think what we have achieved over the last, in particular 6 months, has been positive. We've done a Christmas online virtual market, and thank you in particular for Parry and for the officers for doing that. That's been very successful, because obviously businesses were very hard hit over Christmas, and having an online market was very positive for them, and that was very successful, and we're looking at how we can roll that out in the future. Also, we, as I said to you, we set up a subgroup that's looking for how we can bring about a sculpture outside the Carnival Hub, and that's again formed from this group and bringing in other partners as well. What is really key, I think we had a couple of meetings about what it was that we felt that, we reached out to businesses a couple of years ago. And one of the main things that they said to us was there was a real lack of arts and culture sort of awareness within the borough, and one of the main reasons why young people were leaving their employment and going to places like Bath or going back to London was because whilst there was arts and culture here, it wasn't in the same sort of scale or in the same sort of way that it was being done in sort of major cities. And so from that, this is how this sort of came to fruition, this group, and putting together a strategy so that we could bring everything together under one roof. And one of the things that's also come about from this is an app that has been funded by the LEP, that's the Local Enterprise Partnership, and that puts together all of the things that are going on in the borough under one app, and that's the Walker app. So the strategy also is really closely aligned with national policy, and you'll see that within the document that you've got in front of you. So it's closely aligned with Public Health England's best practice around health and wellbeing, and tackling things like social isolation, and some of the action plans that are coming forward are focused on that, and also around Arts Council England. And we haven't really got a very strong record with getting grants, in particular from them for working in borough and some of the projects that are already going on. And we're very keen that we start to try and focus on getting money into the borough for arts and culture, not only from the Arts Council England, but also from places like Heritage Lottery and things like that. And just wanted to draw your attention to two last things really that are very important, and that's the vision, which is on page 19 of the strategy, and also just the 6 priorities, which are sort of the backbone of the strategy. One of them is enhancing cultural identity and sense of place. Number 2 is the fostering of social interaction and community cohesion. Number 3 is improving health and wellbeing. Number 4 is developing opportunities for children and young people. Number 5 is supporting economic growth. And number 6 is maximising partnerships and collaboration. So I'm just going to hand you over, first of all, to Robin, who can build upon, hopefully, sort of what I've said. And a big thank you, first of all, to Robin, because he's had a pivotal part in this strategy.
Go ahead, Robin.
It's not really a tech issue.
He is on the call, Chairman.
Yeah, I can see him.
Do you want Grant to go first?
Yeah, if Grant's around, yeah, go for it. Robin's obviously got some technical issues. If he can come back, we can swap over.
Hang on.
Oh wait, there he is.
Robin's there. Sorry, Robin.
Sorry about that. I'm not used to Teams. I'm a Zoom man myself. Right, can you hear me? Charlotte's just given a very good summary of the background to this, so I'm just going to personalise it very quickly and say how I got involved and why I'm passionate about what we're doing here. I've been, for the last 5 years, chairing the Arts Society Wokingham, which is an arts appreciation society, but we have a lot of people. You go to the monthly lectures we have, you can recognise half of Wokingham in there, so we have a lot of people involved with that. So we've got a fairly good idea of what's liked and not liked in Wokingham generally. But the reason I got involved was I gave a talk at the Fit for Business conference that Charlotte alluded to, in which I was saying why I felt we needed to have a strategy. And the reason for that, as if you like an outsider, I'm not an officer and I'm not a councillor, is that there is a lot of stuff that goes on in Wokingham Borough, and this is a borough-wide strategy. This is not just about the town. There's a lot of stuff that goes on, a lot of societies, but it isn't particularly coordinated. And if you try and do something different from what small or individual groups do, it's quite hard to get into the system. And I'll just give you a very good example of that. I've been very keen that we have a lot more public art than we have in Wokingham generally. We're getting a bit in now, but it is very, very small compared to what the sort of interests of the community are. And I was very keen that we put that into the new developments, into the core strategy for the town as well, as we were building. Some of it we've managed to get in, some we haven't. There's some stuff going in now. But if you have a strategy, it gives a framework for people to come forward and say, this is an approved strategy, we've thought about it in detail, we know what we're trying to do here, and this particular thing will fit perfectly in this area. And I'll say a little bit of an outsider, that's a really valuable thing to do, because it's very easy in this current environment for arts and culture, arts particularly, to slip down the list of priorities. We've got a pandemic on at the moment. People's time and money is very focused on that. Trying to put money into the arts is quite a difficult sell to people. So it's very important that we have a strategy that we've agreed in a considered way, and then we can go in and say this contributes to that part of the strategy. We're doing various things on this. I'm particularly interested in young people and how arts and culture can work with them. So there's an area there, as I said, in public art as well. I'll stop at this point, but just to say that I've been very keen to support this right from the start. And we've had fantastic work from Grant and the council in backing this, and we're into an implementation phase. So we're trying to move that as quickly as we can within the difficulties of COVID. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Robin. That was very enlightful, personally. Grant.
Hi, hello everyone. So I know some of you, but for those that haven't met me, I'm Grant Thornton.
So I work in the economic growth and place team. I think partly because of my background, I was asked to try and support development of a strategy. I haven't really got a lot more to say. I think Charlotte and Robin have summed it up really well. I think when we talk about arts and culture, it's very easy, very quickly to think about the what, about the performance or the piece of art or whatever else. And I think what the strategy is doing is to try and link it much more to both national and particularly our local priorities, and begin to think about how arts and culture can contribute to outcomes for our residents and for our economy. And so it's thinking about the strategy, and that's why it's really a long-term strategy, because it's not the sort of stuff that you can click your fingers and immediately transform. It's something that's a bit of a slow burn in many ways. And Charlotte mentioned, for example, like establishing and building a relationship with the Arts Council so that we're visible as a borough, and so that we have the potential to attract funding and to have a reputation for arts and culture. And I think the strategy provides a starting point to be able to move in that direction. Other than that, I suppose the only thing I will emphasise is that the pandemic, whilst it's impacted all sorts of people in many difficult ways, it's really made life extremely difficult for the whole arts and culture sector. In terms of just not being able to put anything on, in terms of not being able to plan. And even now, that's really difficult. So, even as we speak, and we're hopeful that we have a degree of normality by the summer, it's very difficult for arts organisations to commit resources into developing activities and programmes in a level of uncertainty. So, I think the good aspect over the last year, though, has been that despite the pandemic, we've had a very positive response to the consultation. And in the report, you can see how we've tried to reflect that in amending the strategy, and it will certainly feed into the ongoing thinking of the Alliance into the action plan. But I think the fact that the organisations in the borough have come together in the Alliance and given their time and energy to help take that forward is a real credit to them and to the borough. So I think I'll just leave it there, really.
Thank you, Grant. I think again, very useful. Members, if you've got questions, start putting your hands up. I will go to them in the order that they do shoot up. I've got a couple of myself. So I saw Graham's hand shoot up marginally before Paul's.
Thank you very much, Chair. Evening all. Sort of speaking partly with the hat of being a member of this committee, but also having chaired the last 3 Wargrave festivals, where we run a festival for 2.5 weeks involving 20 of the 40 different organisations in Wargrave. And so I get the ethos, and I absolutely applaud bringing the Alliance together. But a couple of comments, actually, and one is Charlotte has put out an invitation to get more representation from the North. So I'll stick my hand up for that straight away, because actually we in the North, when we think about going to see plays or art and culture or things like that, we tend to go to Reading or Henley, or sometimes, if it's theatre, High Wycombe. But we don't tend to go to Wokingham. We don't think of Wokingham in the North. I think I could probably speak for my colleagues in Twyford and Hurst too. So certainly in the northern parishes, we've got strong community here, and we could make a positive contribution to the organisation and the Alliance. And then a couple of other points that I've put down here is, have we actually got any idea as the number of different organisations we've got across the borough? Because if in the parish of Wargrave we've got 40 and we've got 17 parishes, then that's a heck of a lot. So knowing what they are and what the genre bias is, that would be interesting to know. And then something else that has been talked about. I'll throw all these out all at once, and then I'll keep quiet. We've talked a lot about young people, and I absolutely agree with all of that. Actually, what I didn't hear was talking about older people, because there's a lot of contribution that can be made there by the retirees. There's always organisers and volunteers required in all of these organisations, most of which are run by volunteers. And then the last thing that I'll just leave on is, it's the reverse of the first point that I brought up. Whilst I'll volunteer for the North, in council, we tend to hear a lot about what's going on in the town councils. And, we out here in the villages have got a lot to contribute. So I think that we need to make sure that it is equitable across the borough, and it is truly across the borough, to go and do things. And I'll leave that there, Chair.
Thank you, Graham. Who wants to take that then?
Do you want me to answer some of that, and then if I've missed any of it out, then maybe Robin and Grant can pick me up?
Go for it.
On that, okay. In terms of your invitation to bring some of the north to the patch in the alliance, then we'd very much welcome that. We have reached out to all of the towns and parishes and invited them to get involved, and we are definitely lacking from involvement from the north, so we'd very much welcome you joining, so thank you very much. And in terms of mapping, trying to understand what assets we have got out there, both in terms of physical assets, but also in terms of just our cultural and arts organisations, that is part of the action plan for this year. And that will be going on as part of that. In terms of young people versus older people, one of the things that did come up, as I said to you before, in terms of the responses that came back, it was very much on the bias of the older people and the older generations coming back to us. It seems to be that the older generations seem much more involved in arts and culture in the borough, have been volunteering and contributing to those organisations, and it's less of the younger people who have got involved. I think that's what we're sort of seeing at the moment, and so I completely hear what you're saying, but we would like to also hear from young people about what it is that's missing, and also try and get people from some of the more deprived communities where they may have not accessed anything at all, and feel that they don't have anywhere to go for that, other than they might have some access to school art workshops and things like that. In terms of reaching some older people, one of the things that I think is key is that there will be some older people who aren't having access because of what's going on at the moment with COVID. And again, within the action plan, we've picked that up in terms of social isolation, and within the next year, we want to be able to reach out to them and make sure that we're also trying to focus our action plan on how can we reach people that can't even go out at the moment. And I'm going to leave Robin to talk about one of the things that has gone on just recently in terms of just doing that. And in terms of, I think there's one other thing that you asked. I can't remember what it was. Have I missed anything else?
It's about equity between the villages and the town councils and making sure it was borough-wide, which we really trying to acknowledge, and we really value all that local knowledge, all that local energy. We'd really welcome that. So, I mean, as Charlotte's already done, more than welcome your engagement with the Alliance, and hopefully we can establish those relationships right across the borough, because we do know there's an awful lot going on that we don't necessarily know about or even understand, which is why it's important that we try and get that mapping across the borough and make sure that everywhere's got a different character. It's got its own separate bit of culture that can add to the richness really right across the borough. Absolutely.
Yeah,
if I can just come in behind that, I mean, most of it has been said, but if I can go back to the point I was making about this being a framework that you can work across the borough, across the 17 villages and parishes, it is really important. This is not a process of adding another layer or another group in. We need to identify where the gaps in what we do are, and then go out and fill them. If I can give you a very simple example, a short one. I think you were referring to arts work, weren't you, Charlotte? I thought you were.
No, not work, but you can. No, it was also to do with taking things into adult social care homes.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a very small thing, but at Christmas time, the Art Society Wokingham had a broadcast, because we're all working virtually, I'm afraid, at the moment. So we had a broadcast which was a sort of Christmas celebration. And what we tried to do, we failed, but we tried to do, it's still going on, is we tried to bring that into. We talked to Optalis, and we tried to bring it into Suffolk Lodge, which is one of the care homes in Wokingham. We failed for a technical reason, and then COVID hit. So there were all sorts of other reasons behind it. But what we established was the fact that we can beam into Suffolk Lodge with one of our lectures or one of our celebrations, and this was a bit of fun for Christmas just beforehand. And the net result of it is that the organisation that the Art Society had paid for their members who paid to belong to that, said, well, because it got screwed up, we'll bring that into them anyway. And what we've offered Suffolk Lodge on that one is that they can choose from a range of things, which could be a live walk. We did a live walk the other day around Tokyo. And brought it into our members. So we can do lots of things like that, and we've learned from COVID. But the other thing I wanted to say is that I don't want to make it a thing about COVID, but we are going to need some joy and enjoyment after COVID. We get over most of it, and this is the vehicle to do it. If we get this in place, and Charlotte will tell you just how fast we are moving on this. If we get this in place, then we can do lots of things across lots of areas, and that's what I'm excited about. I'll get off my soapbox.
Thank you all. I applaud all that's been said and going on. It is actually a huge subject, and I will look forward to working with you on it for the benefit across the borough.
Great.
Thank you.
Yeah, seriously, that sounds really good, and I'll come to a couple of my points and questions in a minute, as well as a few crazy ideas. So, but first things first, Paul.
Thank you, Guy. Thank you, Charlotte, Robin, and Grant, for an excellent background and introduction to the strategy. It was very, very interesting to listen to of where you've come from. If I do the same as Graham, I'll throw all my questions out, and then you can answer them in whatever order you like. Of the 5 towns and parish councils that's responded to the consultation, Winnersh was one of them. Who were the other 4? Charlotte also mentioned about parish councils being involved for the future. Winnersh Parish would certainly like to be involved in any future work. We're a middle parish geographically. We're not part of Wokingham, but we're not one of the northern parishes either. But we're in that middle ground area. The draft strategy was initially drafted pre-COVID, as you mentioned. What considerations been given to adapt if necessary? And how will the strategy help with the recovery? How will you measure success? And will an annual report be produced? And how often will you review the strategy to ensure it's still relevant and up to date? As this is the first arts and culture strategy, how will this be prioritised against competing services? Currently, the ownership is the Alliance. How will this be taken forward after April 2021? and where will the accountability and ownership lie? And as it's a 10-year strategy, not starting until April 2021, will it be retitled 2021 to 2031? Give yourself that extra year, otherwise you've lost them.
I think that's a very easy last question there, Paul.
I thought I'd just leave that one in there, you see. Thank you very much.
Gosh, where to start with that? I'm going to not answer.
You're going to answer the last one.
Okay. Right. Winner. Yes, please get involved.
Yes, thank you.
In terms of the 4 other parishes, Grant can answer that one. In terms of how we've adapted, yes, I mean COVID's been a big part of this journey, and we've adapted as we've gone along, to be honest with you. A big part of this has been our action plan. You know, we started off saying, right, well, our action plan would be all encompassing, and we thought it would be, you know, we'd be delivering all sorts of amazing things over the summer. And then we pretty much drew a huge, great big line through it. And, you know, our partners are massively involved in this. And this is not something that is wholly owned by Woking Borough Council. And particularly, I must stress, this is the action plan is a partnership piece of work, and we can't deliver it without our partners, and we want to get them as involved as possible. And this is why I say, you know, everyone owns this, and the success is measured by as many people as possible coming together to do this, and us helping them, and vice versa. In terms of how often we review it, I think what is really important in light of COVID is that we take a look at the action plan in 6 months' time, because it's not going to be possible to do what we really want. What you do in a normal year, you wouldn't be able to do that. So the first action plan, you know, we've said, yeah, let's have a look at it in 6 months. And then after that, if we're back to sort of more of a normal routine, then I think we should be looking at it every year, and that's how often we should be looking at it. And how we've done in the action plan is we've done the priorities, and then there are subheadings underneath that linked in, absolutely tied into the strategy. And how do we prioritize it against our services? Well, we've had lots of different officers working with us, and that's, you know, right across the council coming into these meetings. And I think it ties in very much with what we're delivering in economic development, in our library services, in adult social care, through to children's social care as well. Because of what our priorities are, if we get all of those services right, and we get our priorities right here in this strategy, then it shouldn't be a competing strategy. It should be actually enhancing the work that we do right across the borough through all of our other strategies, and it shouldn't be conflicting with that. In terms of who owns it, obviously the document sits within Woking Borough, but I see it very much as owned by the partnership, owned by the alliance, and that's why it's called an alliance, and that was very carefully thought through. In terms of the title, yeah, completely agree. Let's change it so that we give ourselves a head start with this year. And I'm just going to pass over to Robin and also to Grant. And Grant, maybe you can tell me which were the other 4.
I'm going to let Grant go first.
Yeah, I think I'll have to get back to you on absolute clarity on the 5 parishes that responded.
That's absolutely fine. That's absolutely fine, Grant.
No, I mean, I know Wokingham did, and I'm pretty sure Early did, but there were also some of the more rural parishes that did respond. So I'll get back to you, Paul, if that's all right. And
that's absolutely fine. Thank you.
Yeah, and the easy bit, the title, yes, hands up. That was an error that we just didn't spot in time.
Yeah, Paul, I don't have much to add to the guys. Charlotte gave a pretty comprehensive answer to all your points there. If just let me check, because as I say, I'm neither a councillor nor an officer. When you referred to who is the owner of the alliance after April, were you talking about after the election? Is that what the point you were making?
No, not at all. No, it
right.
was. And Charlotte actually answered that.
Okay, fine.
It's a partnership still. Will continue as an alliance. So that's absolutely fine. Thank you.
Very much so. It is, you know, it's across parties and it's involving people like myself who are outside as well. So
I wasn't bringing elections or anything like that into it at all. It's just you're looking to start it from April 2021, and who would own it after that, because you've done that initial work. But
yeah,
that's absolutely fine. Thank you very much for your answers.
Thank you. And yeah, there's a long list of people who come along to those meetings and get involved and contribute.
Okay, we'll be in touch. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. Clive.
Yes, thank you, Guy. Thank you for all those answers and your presentations. I don't know if you'll be able to ask this question. It might be a little bit too soon, but has there been any thought about what level of support is needed from Wokingham Borough Council to see some of the improvements that you want to see in the arts and culture agenda, and is there a sort of minimum level of support that you might be looking for?
Do you want me to head off on that one, Charlotte? What do you think?
Go for it. We'll probably have slightly different answers. You can do it outside.
You know me too well. The level of support that I would like to see is most probably unrealistic, because I'm ambitious in terms of what we do. But the level of support we already have, let me just start with that, is we've employed an officer or an employee as a arts and culture person, and that's a major start, because it means you've got to focus, and also that brings with it a budget as well. You have to budget for that person as well. And although there's lots of aspirations in terms of bringing in funding, to be realistic in the early year or so, that has to be funded as well. So we're getting that support in terms of what we're doing. We are using very much the officers around the place to do various things. There's an activity going on at the moment with the Carnival Hub to establish a major piece of art there for the borough, and to make it something that's remarkable, and you know, people want to see it as well. And that's involving, you can imagine what that would involve, because that's being built at the moment. Go for it. Go on, Charlotte.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I think Robin and I are incredibly ambitious for the borough and also for the Alliance. And you know, the subgroup that we're doing at the moment in terms of for the hub is again equally ambitious and is moving at 100 miles an hour in order to get that project going at the same time as it's been built and brought out of the ground. In terms of resource, you know, we have one full-time equivalent, Jodie, and we pull in resource. You know, a huge thank you to Grant, because Grant puts in a massive amount of time on this, and Rianne and Bev, Mel and Joseph as well. So we pull in resource from lots of different places, but they're not specifically allocated to this. I mean, I would love to have more resource because, you know, I think there is a intrinsic value to this, as I said before, spread right across all of the different things that we do, because, you know, it helps with our economic growth, the social value, our health and well-being agenda, and everything from our, as I said to you before, from children's health, social well-being, growth, education, all the way right up until you are in a care home. And we talked about, you know, what Robin was providing through the Arts Society there. Yeah. So I think it is really important that it gets the resource that it needed. And of course, I'd like to see more resource, but I completely accept that at the moment we're not in those times, particularly with COVID at the moment, and resources being pulled in different directions.
Can I just add a bit to that, Charlotte, very quickly? Clive, we are behind the game in terms of what other boroughs have done, and we can pick out some real exemplars of where other boroughs and towns have had in place an arts and culture strategy for some time, detailed, and you can see the result. You can see what happens when people go into places where that's been in place, and the things that they're doing it. And when we were talking at that Fit for Business meeting 2 years back, there was lots of thought coming to us from businesses who were asking, as Charlotte pointed out very strongly, where is the culture in Woking and where's the centre of it? What's happening there? If you think of a town, and I'm going to give you, it doesn't compare with Woking, but I'll give you a town like Bristol, and you ask people to think of what they think of in Bristol. They think of, a strong arts, cultural environment. My son is an arts teacher, and he applied for a job in Bristol. There were 800 applicants for the one job. That's what it brings to it, and that's what we want for Wokingham, he said.
One other thing that I should really mention is that I think that the more successful we become, we can actually look at things like that are self-funding. And one of the things that we've also been discussing is, doing things like our own ticketing, and that's something that we can then help other
like Guildford with.
And then that helps fund, an officer's post within the council. So there are those kind of things that, we should be looking at, exploring further.
Okay, thanks. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Abdul, and then I'm going to have a crack.
Thank you, Guy. Charlotte, as we know, we got 17 parish council offices. We need to involve every single one, including Woodley. And the other question I would like to ask you is, your consultees, who are they, or have they been to only the Registered Charity Commission voluntary organization, or it has been to a small voluntary organization throughout our borough? And I'm very pleased to that you are trying your best, and it is something new. We could follow example of Reading. Reading is marvelously, they're well equipped and they are doing very well. They although next door neighbor to us, and yeah, if you can comment on that, Charlotte, thank you.
Thanks. In terms of the towns and parishes, the consultation was sent to all of them, and we do obviously want them all to be involved. But I think, the timing wasn't necessarily in our favour. But there's still time to get involved, because this is a 10-year strategy, as we talked about before. In terms of the arts and cultural organisations, we've got a large database of those around the borough, and we're continually building on that. And they all received the consultation as well, and they, a number of them fed back, but we would have liked to have seen more. And I hope that in time many of them will get involved. And we have got, as I said before, we have got the Walker app, and we'd like to obviously support them. Putting up their events and supporting them through that. I don't know whether you wanted to build on anything or answer anything else that Abdul's put across.
No, I don't think so. I mean, and I think the consultation was challenging because we were confined to either what you might call official organisations that we had records for, town and parish councils being an obvious one. And other than that, it was just trying to raise profile and get responses online. I think what's already being acknowledged by the Alliance is that area of engagement and ongoing dialogue it doesn't end at a fixed point. It's going to be ongoing. And if there are people that you think or aware of that you think would be interested and would like to have a conversation, but by all means get in touch, get them to email me, or I'm sure Charlotte would say the same. We want to cast the net as widely as possible, I think.
Yeah, and in terms of Woodley Town, in specifically, the town centre manager has come along to the Alliance meetings. Not for all of them, but he has been involved. I don't know whether Robin, you wanted to comment on any of that.
No, I just was going to make a quick point about Reading being held up as an exemplar there. My own organisation, as I said, the Art Society, there are 320 of those across the England. We have one in Wokingham, there's one in Ascot, there's one in Bracknell. There's none in Reading. So they haven't got everything. And so some of our members, they will come in from Reading as well. So let us be the exemplar, so that somebody at Reading is saying, do you know what, we want a place just like the Carnival Hub in Reading.
Well, when they
in
apply,
Wokingham, I'm sorry, yes, in Wokingham.
Robin, when they apply for city status, they seem to tick that box.
They did what? Sorry, missed
when
it.
they apply for city status, Reading, they had the box ticking off as they got a marvelous, diverse, culture.
I think they were being a tad optimistic if they can match the art societies and at Robin's level, as it were, personally.
Here.
Thank you, Charlotte. Thank you, Robin.
Thank you.
Yes, a couple of questions from me. Robin, Grant, Charlotte, thank you very much for a very comprehensive. I think this is good. It is fulfilling the parts of the vision that was basically that personally I saw as the regeneration of Wokingham Town Centre was turning it into a much more specific cultural hub as opposed to a town centre, and this basically tries to increase that in that regard. I did have a couple of questions, but most of them have already been taken. The question, this might be more to Robin than to necessarily Charlotte and Grant, but what support do all arts organisations require from the council, basically coming out of the COVID pandemic? Because we know that COVID is going to be, I've said this on many meetings, I'm a firm believer that COVID is going to be the 21st century's flu, in that there is going to have to be a risk related to it going forward for many, many years to come. So what support can the council offer in that regard? Is it effectively providing something like, and this may even be temporary, basically an outdoor theatre in somewhere like Dinton? So basically a wooden outdoor theatre using some of the wood that we reclaim from the forest due to tree falls, etc., to basically create a much more COVID-safe outdoor environment to basically support our amateur dramatic societies, for example, that we can't actually get inside, and we don't know if they're going to be able to get inside until June, July time. So it's things like that. What sort of support would you want from both the council and the parishes, but also as us as councillors as well? That's just one thing that pops into my head. And then the other question, this much more is maybe towards Charlotte and Grant, with the application for effectively a second film studio being built in the borough, and from what I'm hearing along the grapevine, we might end up with something much more akin to downtown Los Angeles if some things I hear are going to happen, which is ironic considering my wife's in the background about 4 movies from the 90s, because that's where she grew up. What aspect of support should we basically look to those organizations in basically enhancing art and culture in and around, well, beyond the borough in this case as well, because they will have a much greater reach?
Shall I kick off?
Yeah.
Go for it.
You'll get the emotional response from me, and then Charlotte will give you the real response, but I'll give you the emotional one.
I prefer to have someone who wears their hearts on their sleeve with this than basically the cold emotionless response. That's the whole point of the arts.
I don't think you'll get cold from Charlotte, I should say, but you'll certainly get heart on your sleeve from me. I'll tell you what we want, and I'm not saying that we don't get it, but we don't always get it. I want a can-do attitude from Wokingham Borough Council. I want to go there and say, this is what we want to do. We think we can raise the money for it. We think we can do it quickly. And I don't want a lot of reasons why this doesn't fit with the policy, it's the wrong thing to do, you can't do it. I could give you some examples, but I'm not prepared to do it while the program's being recorded. But generally, we get tremendous support from the officers, and in fact from, you know, a lot of the councillors as well. But it is that, you know, when we're pushing hard, and COVID has been a particularly difficult time to do that, because I'll give you a very simple example. If we're looking at things for young people, and we have been doing that, then of course, you know, the staff are very tied up with what's happening at the moment because of COVID. But these things are important. And my agenda for the last 2 or 3 years that I've been involved in trying to do this is try to get arts and culture up the priority list. It's very easy for it to slip down against practical matters. And we need to keep the bigger picture in mind, that we want this to be just such a great place to live in, which is part of our, you know, whole strategy. But also we want, you know, for that to be positive. People come and visit us. People want to put their businesses here because it's just, you know, it's the right place. So, and we need that can-do attitude to do it.
Thanks. I think so. Just start by your first question. What is it that we can do in terms of events and things to help people post-COVID and help our organisations? I think we have a resource in terms of you know, our communications team, and also our other officers who do things in and around the borough, leisure, sports and libraries. You know, once those are up and running again, then you know, I hope that they will be able to help people come together and do really important things like getting back into the libraries for learning and different events. You know, libraries are a real hub for all generations, and they're fantastic for getting young people, particularly our school children, back into meeting people and doing groups again. And you know, I'm a mother of a 12-year-old, and you know, she really needs to get back into meeting people.
It's hard enough with the 4-year-old, Charlotte. I get it.
Yeah, exactly. And you know, I think that's going to be, you know, tough, just getting back out there for many people of all generations. What can we do as a borough? You know, we can help put on different events and help facilitate that, both ourselves, but also in partnership with other people as well, whether that be outdoor theatre and cinema and things like that. And outdoor cinema is one of the things that we have been considering. Another thing on our action plan that we're considering is doing something like a light festival. That's something that, you know, could be very easy to organise, and I've seen it done in Martha's Vineyard in America, whereby, you know, in and around a town, people organise over the period of a few days, putting out lanterns and things like that out in their windows and their porches and things.
Festival lights, yeah.
And just simple things like that can bring a tremendous amount of joy to a town or to a village, and you can do it right across the borough on a specific week, and I think that could be really fantastic. The other thing that we want to continue is things like virtual markets, not just at Christmas time, but it may be something that we would take forward into next Christmas. And also we're looking again at potentially doing a Christmas market, because we had to postpone the one that we were looking at doing this Christmas. And looking at other events, there's lots of different things that we're considering in the action plan, including things like social prescribing, outdoor mental health events and things like that. But all of those sort of things we can start advertising, not only our own events, but our partners' ones on things like Waka on the app. In terms of the film studio, I think that's really important. And if it does get approval, you know, we've got the BBC wanting to move there. We've obviously got Shinfield Studios wanting to move there, and potentially another big organisation, which many people love, potentially wanting to move there in the future. So that whole area could become, you know, the next Hollywood for our generation. And with that, it brings, you know, tremendous opportunities, and also not just jobs, but learning opportunities from multiple people of different generations. And I think that we need to be part of that. And I've stressed that to the CEO of that organisation, particularly Shinfield Studios. I've stressed that to him, that we very much want to be part of it. So I think that when the time comes, which probably isn't today, and it certainly isn't this month. But there will be opportunities, I'm sure, and he's indicated to me that there will be, in terms of things like a learning college and things like that. I think that we definitely are in a strong position for strengthening our arts and cultural offer here and putting us on the map nationally and also internationally.
Very good answer. And that, I think, comes up to the final point I would wish to make. And I think this is something that I think that I will be looking to Robin and to a lesser extent Shirley as well going forward on this, is the fact that this is the draft proposal. And I feel that this is where we need to have the scrutiny part of the overview and scrutiny meeting going forward, because this is the overview stage. We're basically looking at the policy, we're looking at the ideas behind it, etc. And personally, I think this is completely sound. This is exactly the right sort of view that we need to do for the effectively the guidelines and the policies going forward on how we're going to be set. The operational minutiae is going to be down to Robin, down to the officer in charge, and basically working together as a much larger group to basically get the actual tactical on the ground. Let's do this, let's do that, etc. And yeah, Robin's correct. We need to have a can-do attitude, and the least I can do is, as the current chair of this committee, is effectively have put this down as a standing item in terms of scrutiny, so that at least once a year this remains on the scrutiny agenda, so that the ongoing progress of this report continues. And that's the very least we can do on this committee, because we have an opportunity here to turn the borough into a true arts hub. And I do not want to effectively have everyone, oh, it's Reading. No, it's Wokingham. It's going to be the Wokingham Arts Plan. It's going to be the Wokingham Arts Society. It is the Wokingham borough area. Heck, if we want to kidnap the rest of the Thames Valley and make it the Thames Valley and we're running it, that would be even more funny and even better. But that's the attitude we need. And I hope, because I'm looking more at you, Robin, than this, because this is a lot closer to your heart in that regard, is what you wanted to hear from me, and I hope I'm speaking for the committee.
Yeah, it's very much what I want to hear from you. I think I didn't know this was coming up, actually, and being ignorant of WBC policies, I said to Charlotte, what is this, that I've been sent an invitation to? I think my view about it, I think Charlotte's and Grant's as well, was that we wanted to expose what we've been doing up to now, because we've been working away quietly in the background, and that, I can go and ask a lot of people, they wouldn't have known what we were doing. And now we're at the point, the reason that the alliance came about as against the original working group that was on this, was we went from the writing the strategy bit to now how we're going to populate the action plan. That's where who's responsible, what the measures are will come in, and we're doing that right at the moment. But we're also doing something else at the moment, which is that we're looking for opportunities to demonstrate what we can do. So we're looking at, I hate the cliche, but I'll use it, low-hanging fruit. So we can do some of that stuff as well. And, particularly with the Carnival Hub, which is being built as we talk, even though it's a very bad time to raise money. I
think planning regulations would have something to say about it being built right now at 9 o'clock at night.
Oh, I would hope they would. In my world, people are working at 9 o'clock at night. You've got two very good examples here in Grant and Charlotte.
That's a very fair point, but I think residents don't object to building work at that late at night.
Right then. We do it silently then. I have to say that the actual document itself, strategies document itself, Grant has put so much work into that, and it really looks good. It's fantastic effort from you, Grant. I was so pleased that we've been working with you over this period. Anyway, yes, I'm pleased to see you saying that, Guy, and I'll come back to you if there's things
before you interject, Charlotte, I have seen Shirley's hands shoot up, and I know that she's got a pecuniary interest, but I think it is worthwhile her having her say on this as well, because she has been involved a lot closer than the rest of us have.
Yeah, thank you, Guy, and thank you, Robbie and Charlotte and Grant. All I really wanted to say was that, and it's been a struggle for me keeping quiet throughout the whole proceedings. So,
you've done well, Shirley, keeping quiet.
I know, and now I've sort of burst. But all I really wanted to say was for the rest of the committee really is to take a look at the Wocca app, get it installed on your phones. There's obviously not going to be loads of things. It's WOCCA, Wocca. We won't go into all the history of that, but I think it's probably worth, getting it on your phones and sharing it with your families and your friends, so that when we are open for business again in the arts and culture world and events start happening, you're going to have the app and you're going to be able to, be first in line to get tickets and to get involved with things. So that's all I really wanted to say at this point, if that's all right.
I think that's completely fine, Shirley. Thank you, and thank you for the work you've done on this. I think it needs to be said, because this is really good. Charlotte, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to really round up by saying a massive thank you to everyone that's here that has got involved in this, but those that aren't as well in the partnership in the alliance, because they've put in so much of their voluntary time getting this together, and particularly those in the subgroup at the moment who are putting in weekends worth of work.
So are you, Charlotte.
Well, yeah, but that's different. But everyone is just giving up so much time for this project, and for the alliance, but also for the subgroup. And officers are going above and beyond in order to do this. And Clive's point about resource, we need resource. That needs to be part of the consideration, I suppose, from tonight. We need resource in order to make this successful. We can do it through goodwill of our alliance, and that will happen. But you can't do it without some paid for resource within the council as well. But I just formally wanted to thank everybody who has got involved, because chairing it, I couldn't have done it without them.
Thank you, Charlotte. And I've just been cheeky and downloaded it, and already I'm impressed. I'm going to need to have a look around on that. Okay. I think what we need to do now is, I think this needs to go to the executive. Because the next stage is this is going to the executive. Is it next month? Can't remember. I think this is. I'm speaking personally but I hope I'm speaking for the committee. I think this needs our wholehearted support. I can't fault anything in terms of the overall policy and planning aspects of this. It's the operational aspect and basically getting that can-do attitude that we need to ensure goes through, as per Robin's request. So that's what we should be saying, as it were, to the executive. So I might draft a quick email just to recommend that with the committee's support. Basically saying that this should be adopted and approved, and that the attitude that we should be taking with this is, yes, we can do this and we should be doing this. Does anyone have any objection to me doing that?
No.
Chairman, was there also the proposal earlier to have this as a returning item, just to monitor
yes,
the?
That was the second thing, to basically have this return either December, January, February next year. I think would be appropriate, because that way we'll have a year of effectively bedding in, and we can then review if we need to have it come back more regularly, just to see how it's going from an overview point of view, because we're only just going to adopt it. We're going to have a major sea change, hopefully with the pandemic easing up into the spring and summer, which means hopefully that we can get lots of events, lots of ideas, and lots of basically planning on how we can go things moving forward. And I think I think in the winter we'll have a bit more quieter time, so that effectively Grant, Robin, and the rest of the team that will be supporting this document can take stock and then basically come back to us and report.
A quieter time, that would be nice.
Robin, you should try working in IT security for the last. Well, since the pandemic started about this time last year, I haven't had a break. I've been at full speed for 14 months. So I know how you feel. But yes, Robin, Grant, thank you very much for this. Charlotte, thank you very much for coming along. I'm looking forward to this. I really am. And Shirley, I think we'll start asking you questions as to how things are going semi-regularly as well, quietly after the meeting.
Righto. I must pay attention at all times then.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, right. Robin, Grant, Charlotte, thank you very much once again. If you want to head off and enjoy the rest of your evening, please do go ahead. And look forward to seeing you and speaking with you all again soon.
Thanks.
Thank you, Guy. Thank you very much.
Good evening.
Bye.
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 So, moving on to the last item of the agenda, which is the update for the May elections. Is it Anne? Are you taking this one? Andrew, you've appeared.
I've appeared. I've been to the audit committee, and now I'm having the experience of your committee as well in the same evening.
I hope you got the bit to enjoy the bits of the arts instead of
yes. No.
It's a lot more fun than flooding. Well, I think we can all agree there. So go ahead, Andrew.
Sure. Okay. Well, as you know, I came to your committee just before Christmas to give you an update as to where we were at that time. I guess at that time there was a lot of uncertainty around whether or not the elections were going to proceed. But on the 5th of this month, the government made the announcement that the elections on the 6th of May are going ahead. They were very clear about that. They've given a lot of extra additional information in terms of what returning officers around the country like myself should be doing by means of preparation for the 6th of May. I just wanted to, hopefully you've had the chance to see the sort of the overview report that I've provided, so I'm not going to repeat everything in there, but I just wanted to talk about one or two sort of principles and one or two key points that I think the committee may be interested in. But so firstly, in terms of the planning sort of priorities for me, number one priority is safety. So yeah, we're planning on the basis of various restrictions being in place. That's the clear sort of guidance that we've had. So safety is that sort of overriding priority. Closely aligned to that is the security and integrity of the election. Obviously that's a given for every election, but that's absolutely the same this year. But the point I was going to make about the sort of the third thing is around sort of timeliness. So I'm very conscious, particularly for councillors, that you want to get the results as quickly as possible. And for the electors, you want to have a quick, hassle-free experience in a polling station when you cast your vote. What I would say is that this year it is going to feel different and look different because of that priority around safety. So it will mean that we'll have additional safeguards in place in polling stations, which are set out in the report, and I can talk about that in more detail if members would wish. But also the various counts are going to take longer than what people would have expected in previous election times. But I think it's important that I make that point, that this is about a balance, but making sure that everything we do is COVID safe and COVID secure. Having said all that, the government's made it very clear that for voters, the choices as to how people cast their vote remain the same. So as usual, voters would have the choice to visit a polling station on May the 6th and cast their vote there. They can also take up that opportunity to take a postal vote. And there's also a proxy vote process as well that the government has made some, or is in the process of making some amendments to, such that if, for example, anyone was self-isolating in the immediate lead up to May the 6th, the deadline for applying for proxy votes has been extended to 5 p.m. on polling day itself. So the government is trying to accommodate the particular situation that we're we're planning for, but equally keeping all of those choices available. One thing I would say is that in terms of our communications, that's a key message, but we will be encouraging people to consider if they want to take up a postal vote application, for those who haven't already done so. We already have a significant part of the electorate who've chosen to take postal votes in previous elections, but as I say, we are encouraging people to do that where they feel that's appropriate to them, but it is their choice. Just to sort of say a little bit about the sort of chronology of things. So on the 29th of March, the notices of election will be published, and that will sort of kick off the official sort of election process. It isn't just what happens on polling day itself. So that will start for the council, what we call the pre-election period, or also known as PERDA. But also, and most importantly, for candidates and agents, it will commence the nominations period immediately the day after the notice of election is published. That'll run through to the 8th of April. By mid-April, therefore, we'll be in a position to have printed ballot papers, and that will allow us to start to send out postal vote packs to people who've applied for a postal vote. So sort of in mid-April is when people should start to expect to receive, or shortly after mid-April, expect to receive their postal votes. That takes us through to polling day itself, which I've already described will feel different on the day. It will be secure. We've had to make some changes already to the normal polling stations that we use, and that was approved by council last Thursday evening. But there may be some other last minute changes that we may need to do because those polling stations aren't available to us. I would hope that they are very few, if not any, but there is that provision to do so should we need to do that. Then it just moves us into the period of the count, or the verification and the count immediately after polling day on the Thursday. So on the Friday, we'll verify all the ballot boxes for all the different elections that are taking place. So that's the borough elections, the police and crime commissioner elections, at least 2 town council by-elections, and maybe some contested parish elections. All the verification is scheduled for the Friday. On the Saturday, we're focusing on doing the 18 counts for the borough wards. We do have the Sunday in contingency should we not get through all the work on the Saturday, and then on the Monday we will do the count for the police and crime commissioner, the local area of Wokingham, and then also any of the town or the town and parish counts as well. There is an error in, or an update to the report where it talks about the candidates and agents meeting being on the 1st of March. That's actually been moved to the 9th of March, and communications are going out around that as we speak. But that will be the opportunity for potential candidates and agents to hear from myself and my colleagues around some more detail, particularly around the nominations process and what candidates and agents need to do with regard to that. But I'll pause there, Chair, and very happy to take questions, comments that members have.
Thank you, Andrew. Clive, I saw your hand shot up pretty much at the start.
Thank you, Guy. Thank you very much, Andrew. I have forgotten when you're going to have the candidates and agents briefing.
No, 9th of March.
9th of March. Is that in the evening, Andrew, or during the day?
It'll be 6 o'clock, I believe it is, on the 9th of March.
6 o'clock, okay.
So it depends on when you define evening.
Yeah, it's a virtual meeting, of course, as well.
All right. Oh, I've got it in my bloody diary. Okay.
Language?
Yeah, excuse me. So you've told us again that the number of postal votes are seem to be going up a bit. And is there a possibility that we can write to all of the electors in the borough who haven't got a postal vote and send them a postal vote form saying, here is a form. If you do not want to go to the polls because of COVID-19, because of whatever, you can have this for just one election, or you can have it for more than one election, and just give people the opportunity to vote from the comfort of their own home without having to go and mingle with anybody else.
The short answer to that is yes. That's in our project plan to correspond with all voters to set out the choices that they've got, but for those voters who don't already have a postal vote, to give them that application form. So if they chose to do so, they could apply for a postal vote.
So that is going to come out from the council, is it?
That will come out from the council. I don't want to put a date on it, but certainly within the next 2 to 3 weeks. So it would give people plenty of time before the closing date to apply for a postal vote to do so, should they choose to do so. But as I say, there's already, or you've just said, Clive, as well, there's already a number of reasonably high percentage of the electorate who've already taken up that opportunity already.
What is the percentage of that currently?
It was 19-20%, wasn't it, Andrew? Something
in
like
very
that.
approximate terms, it's approximately 20%. But that's with the caveat that it's still a significant number of weeks before the closing date for people to apply. So that could well increase.
So are we sending the letter to each household or to each person on the electoral roll who hasn't got postal vote already?
Every household will get a letter, but we won't be, for those people who've already got a postal vote, we won't be including another application form. What we're really keen to do is make sure we don't confuse any residents. But equally, we don't want to cause additional work for ourselves in terms of having another form to process that for somebody who's already got a postal vote. So this is part of the reason why I'm just slightly hesitant in terms of giving you any specific dates as to when that's going out. For me, it's really important that we get that messaging right.
Yeah.
So it will be ready when it's ready.
Another question around this is it going to be based on the existing register or the register that you put together at the beginning of March?
I'd have to come back with you with a specific answer on that, Clive, just to check. But it will be the electorate as we understand it at the point in time that we send the letter out, or certainly complete the letter.
Okay. And you've said that campaigning will be allowed to go on during the election, but I guess we don't know what sort of campaigning is going to be allowed yet, do we? Unless you've had any guidance today after the Prime Minister's announcement earlier on.
I've not caught up personally in terms of whether there's anything in today's announcements that are specific to campaigners. What I would advise every potential candidate and agent to do is keep a close sight on the Electoral Commission website, because certainly any specific guidance for campaigners, you would be able to find that on that website.
Okay, and then my last question, you say that we're going to have as safe a possible count, and when we've talked about it previously, you sort of suggested that we might just do a few wards and then move on to another few wards and then another few. This is when we're counting on the Saturday. I guess that's probably going to be the same for the verification on the Friday. Have you firmed up any more details about that yet?
It's very much work in progress at the moment, but you're right that, and this is what I meant about it, it will be different to what you've experienced previously. So through the day, it will be staggered. So there'll be groups of wards where we'll be inviting in candidates and agents and anyone else entitled to witness the count. So yeah, there'll be a sort of series of sort of staged invites and exits through that period to make sure that we're maintaining social distance numbers in the hall at the same time, etc., etc.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. Thanks.
Thank you, Clive. Alison.
Hello, Andrew. It's very reassuring to hear that you're constantly replanning and keeping the safety of our residents at the forefront. I assume there's going to be a lot of extra work with increased people moving to a postal vote, and I absolutely support getting as many voters as we can to be voting by post. That's going to mean more staff for the ERO office. Are you able to recruit more staff, or are you moving people within the council to help with that?
It's a combination of both of those things. So we've got additional resource in the office, in the core office. So that's already in place to sort of recognise the workload and make sure we're managing that workload. But you know, this is very much sort of seen as a corporate event, so we've got support from right across the council. As the chairman was saying, I was saying to the chairman earlier, I was in the audit committee. The council has added the elections onto the corporate risk register this year, recognising the corporate focus that this needs to make sure that it's successful. So I'm confident at this stage that the resourcing issue, certainly in terms of that core office, is being addressed and managed.
That's very good to hear. Thank you. Second point is about the nomination papers, which are normally signed by 10 people on the roll in that ward. I was really pleased to see the Electoral Commission have confirmed that we won't need to be finding 10 people, it only needs to be 2. Does that still need to be wet signed, or can we wet signed, or well, can people insert electronic signatures to scanners that we can send to?
It is still a wet signature requirement, but the detail as to completing the nomination forms, again, that sort of detail will be covering for candidates and agents on the 9th of March at that briefing.
Okay, just thinking about the safety of it all. So how soon would you be able to make available the most up-to-date absent voter list, so that we're not creating extra work by having people sending in postal votes forms who are already on the absent voter register?
I need to get back to you on that, Alison, in terms of the detail of that answer, but I'll take that away and I'll give you a specific answer on that. Because,
you know, as you say, you've increased workload, and we really hope there's going to be far more. I mean, I understood it was 20%. I just wondered if it had gone up a lot by January, even, since the amount that we had registered on postal votes previously.
I think all I'd say, or just repeat what I said, basically, that there's still a number of weeks to go until the closing date for applications. So
oh, right. So you couldn't say we knew in January it had gone up to 30%.
I think to talk in sort of generalities, we're probably at a sort of similar position. We're in a similar position sort of January, earlier in February, to what we were immediately prior to the general election in December 2019. So I guess that's indicative of the fact that, given that there's still a number of weeks to go, it's likely that we'll end up with a higher proportion of postal voters for this election than we did back in December 2019.
Okay, just asking about the Police and Crime Commission account, because we don't normally do that by boroughs, do we? They're normally all collected. There's one Thames Valley count.
Yes, it's a decision for the area returning officer. So last time in 2015, it was done centrally for the area. But this time, the area returning officer has decided that she wants local counts rather than a centralised count. So it's her decision.
But certainly safer than, I mean, it was a huge count in Aylesbury, I think it was.
Yeah.
So you've got 3 full days of counts.
Yeah, it's going to be a busy period straight after polling day.
Thank you very much for all the work that you and the team are doing. I know Melanie's done a brilliant job in previous years. I'm sure she'll be able to carry it off again this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Alison. Anything? I assume that's everything. So, Paul?
Thank you, Guy. Yeah, most of my questions have actually been asked, but I do have one little question at the end. Schools, because you're still using several schools which are listed out on page 27, and due to the lost time because of coronavirus, is there any way that they could remain open, because they've only just started to go back, and still function as a polling station?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and it's sort of very high in terms of my priorities to make sure that the election doesn't disrupt education any further than education's already been disrupted over this last period. We've got 4 schools. What I would say is that over recent years, we've done everything possible to minimise the use of schools in any elections. So I can't give you precise figures, but it was significantly more schools that were utilised in the past. But for those 4 schools, I'm working directly with them in terms of looking to see how we can mitigate the impact on them. And yeah, I know some of those schools in particular have particular concerns that I'm looking to see how we can address. Some schools are slightly more relaxed about it, and it depends on the particular layout of the school and various other factors. So it's really a sort of case-by-case basis, but anything that I can do to mitigate the impact, I'm looking to do that for obvious reasons.
What came to the top of my head was still using the school grounds, but having a marquee set up. So
yeah, that
actually utilising the school buildings and a marquee set up. It is May, it's early May, and weather is a lot warmer and usually much better than something like in December, which was the last general election. Could that be considered?
Yeah, a marquee is already one of the things that we're considering in terms of is that a way to mitigate that risk? And it may work for some schools, it may not work for others. Again, it depends on the sort of individual particular circumstances that they've got.
Okay, thank you very much.
And Paul has now cursed us to an absolutely terrible May. With that question, Shirley.
Thank you, Guy. Yeah, hi, Andrew. Could I just clarify something you said earlier on in response to Clive? I just missed it briefly, but did you say that you'll be sending out, planning to send out a postal voting application form to everybody in the borough who isn't already down as a postal voter? Is that what you said?
I did, yeah. There'll be a general communication to all voters, but for those who don't already have a postal vote, in the general correspondence, it will include a postal vote application form.
Good, right, thank you for that. And the second thing is, have you got a view on tellers at polling stations? I'm assuming that that's going to be something that's possibly not on the agenda this year, because it does, even though when you ask people their polling number, you could do that from a reasonable distance, but invariably they zone right in on you and sort of show you their card. And I just wondered if that had been something that had come up at all.
It's on our list of risk assessments that we need to complete, and we're also in liaison with the Electoral Commission around any further advice that they've got. But the rules around tellers being part of the election process haven't changed. So the Electoral Commission or the government have not said that tellers wouldn't be allowed outside polling stations, but clearly in terms of voters and my staff and the tellers themselves, we need to make sure that is done appropriately with the appropriate sort of COVID restrictions in place.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, Shirley asked my question. Alison, is your hand shot back up? Because I just saw Clive's has shot back up. Okay,
sorry,
Clive.
no, I didn't move my hand. Sorry, I hadn't taken it down.
Clive.
Yeah, Andrew, do you know if other councils are doing the same as what you're planning to do as regards encouraging people to postal vote?
I understand some have, some haven't. It's a local choice around that. I mean, I deliberately use the word encourage because that's the word that the government use.
Yeah.
So it's not about mandating people to postal vote or anything like that. But yeah, that word encourage is there. But let me make it clear, that's not because voting in a polling station won't be safe to do so. But if people do have any concerns or it's just not convenient to them, like I would say for any election, then don't lose your vote, use a postal vote.
Yeah. And this might be a silly question, but I am assuming that this letter either goes from you as the returning officer or from the chief executive, and it doesn't include anything that might be related to any political people.
No, to be clear, no, it would be from me as the returning officer, as indeed any election correspondence would be from me, any official correspondence.
Okay, thanks for that. Thank you. Thank you, Guy.
All right, thanks, Clive, and that covers off all my questions as well. Because thankfully we're all pretty much on the same view and opinions on this one. Andrew, I think it's a case of thanks to you and your staff for the progress on this. I do think we are on the verge of, as my cat's trying to destroy stuff, we are on the verge of basically taking the Oregon approach on full postal vote for some elections. I think will take place in the next decade or so, I think. But yeah, with it being on the corporate risk register, that is an important aspect as well. Although I do love the fact of the fact in our own notes it said it will be added today. So yeah, I think it's a case of this will be handed over to audit, as it were, from the corporate risk register point of view, if they decided to put it on that. But I think there'll also be some aspects to look at in the new municipal year about how everything went, and basically have it be put into our business continuity, disaster recovery, whatever we want to call it, plan going forward for if we have a major pandemic level problem again, and basically learn from what we're doing.
Sure. No, I think that's a really good proposal. I think there will almost certainly be learning out of the elections. I mean, we do that every year after an election as a matter of course, but I suspect this year there'll be even more things that we'll want to reflect on.
I think because it's part of the corporate risk register, thinking off the top of my head, because I'm thinking back to my time as the chairman of the audit committee, it might be worthwhile doing after the election, holding a special meeting of both audit and community and corporate once you've done your own internal assessment, basically you giving us the bones and all report and what it is, and then effectively it gives both committees the information that we need to where it sits in the corporate risk register, but also for lessons learned for basically going forward and any recommendations, because we'll also have been involved in the political and the electoral side of it as the candidates would have that aspect to give our opinions on as well. So I think that might be an idea going forward, if that is the correct process. I honestly can't, it's been so long since I was chair of audit, I can't remember the process, because I know we can have joint meetings if required for special items, which I think this would be a one-off special item.
Yeah, I think that would be appropriate, Chairman, to do it that way, and there's precedent for that.
Yep. Okay, so that's an action for me to reach out to the chairman of the audit committee and basically suggest that that's done at some point in July, August time.
Yeah, I think we perhaps need to take that offline. The reason I hesitate a little bit is, as a returning officer, like all returning officers, I'm required to meet performance standards by the Electoral Commission. So the Electoral Commission do their own review of my performance. So that might be part of the consideration as well, and I'm not quite sure when they'll have that.
Yeah, that's why I went deep into the summer as opposed to early summer, late spring. But yeah, okay, I'll take that as an action for the committee to basically reach out to the chair of audit and suggest that we do that as best practice going forward, because that way it's, instead of having to do 2 meetings, we just hit it all off at one, and there is precedent for us to do that. Okay. I think that's it, Andrew. I think you can go and enjoy the rest of your evening, because I think we just need to note this and just everyone be the principal point of what you're doing, and the principal point that we should all be doing is keeping people safe, and that is the core aspect of it. The politics and the electioneering and everything, it takes a back seat. We need to keep people safe, and that's the key aspect.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Anyway, thank you very much, Andrew. It was very useful, and have a very good rest of your evening. Committee members, we've only got one more thing left, and that is basically looking at the forward plan. There is only one thing on the 29th, which is basically the update from the police and fire services. We will most likely be in Purda, so it's going to be everyone needs to be aware of that aspect. But it's the operational update from police and fire, and I presume that nothing has come up that they have been delayed so far, Callum.
No, not that I'm aware. I've had confirmation from both the police service and the fire service that they're intending to come along, so all should be well. As you say, it is just worth bearing in mind that will be in Purda. So as we did, I believe we had a meeting in Purda last year. I think that was for the budget, or the year before last even.
It was the year before last.
Yeah, the year before last. So you will be issued some wording by Andrew in his under his hat as monitoring officer, just to remind committee members and any members of the public that might be there, for example, just of the fact that we are in Purda, albeit the first day. I think the intention is, as in previous years, I know Graham is a member of as one of our representatives of the Royal Berkshire Fire and Rescue Service, but we also have, I believe, 3 other members, and I think at least one of them might also attend the meeting, just to provide some input from sort of the member side of things as to sitting on the board. The
more the merrier. These meetings are open to all members, and Gary, I've just noticed. Thank you very much for sticking around the whole time. Everyone's welcome to these meetings to basically open, and they're open for that question. But it would be very good to get the members' view from from the fire authority.
Chair, I do know from informal discussion over the last week that the chief has sanctioned the presentation, and I believe that Pauline Hellier-Silmans, who's one of the members, is intending to come, and she is actually deputy chair of the fire service. The other 2, for a matter of record, are Angus Ross and Rachel Shepherd-Debay.
Thank you, Graham.
So that's the only real update I have with that. It will just be that one item on the agenda, as I say, because of reasons of Purda, but because this is a business as usual item, we can still hear it. The only other thing I have to mention is that collectively, but sort of taking the lead on it, the Overview and Scrutiny Management Committee are currently taking submissions and getting ideas for the committee work programmes for the next municipal year. So if you have any suggestions for community and corporate specifically, please email me or Neil with any suggestions or things that you think should be on the agenda for sometime next year. But if you obviously some of you sit on other committees, whether that's ONS management or one of the other 2 subcommittees, again, just email the respective clerk again or Neil to get it included for consideration for their March meeting. But that's all I really have to say, Chairman.
That was the next item on my thing. So thank you very much, Callum. Does anyone have anything they wish to add right now to that list, or are you happy to basically email myself or Callum to basically bring that forward? I am taking silence as
happy to email
acceptance.
I did email a large list of items for scrutiny, because they were for a range of the committees. I sent all of mine to Neil directly.
Excellent. I look forward to reading them in March. Okay. With that, everyone, thank you very much for attending this meeting of the community and an extraordinary meeting of the Community and Corporate Overview and Scrutiny Committee. I'm doing it again, it seems, with audit as well. Thanks very much for your time. We can draw the meeting to close at 22:08, and everyone have a good rest of their evenings.
Thank you, Guy. Good night.
Good night, guys.